Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The summer was cold and very rainy. Clouds became a familiar sight for its inhabitants. The village was located not far from the city, so it had a comfortable infrastructure and the charm of nature. In the center, two large stores, church, village council, and around the boundless fields with wheat, tennis forest, a beautiful rivulet. Through the village past the railroad line, once a day a suburban train rushed past. All day long the little station was lively. In winter, women carried pies, donuts, freshly baked kindling to the trains. In summer, there was a trade in fruits and vegetables from the vegetable gardens. Peter, whom the whole neighborhood called no other name than tractor driver, stopped near a familiar peddler to buy some seeds. He was on his way home from work from the village garage. Today, he had left his mechanical horse for maintenance. It felt strange, as if he had forgotten something. Never left a man behind. But I'm going to my tractor as if I had no hands. He thought, as if reading his thoughts. Adriana, handing him a bag of seeds, wryly remarked what kind of people came to see me. And on my own 2 feet, I'm faint, but not sarcastic and baba. The tractor driver snapped at me. All you want is to talk, no matter what. The main thing is to scratch your meat. And I'm like a bone in your throat. To all your female tribe. Why did the head of the tribe smirk? Because I haven't married any of you. So you're angry. Have you forgotten that I'm living with a man? What do I need you for? You forgot that only the night before last you broke into my house. Asked me about our tender friendship last month. I whispered in her ear. Are you silent? As burn with this man, starting with 100 grams, so you fly to me. You won't forget the path. Adriana frowned and turned away from Peter. Peter was the first guy in the village. Tall, broad-shouldered blonde with blue eyes and curly hair. He could play the guitar, too. The girls were standing in line. Anyway, he's a good guy. He tasted a couple of seeds. They're good, Adriana, but don't be mad. Get on with your life and you'll be all right. He looked up at the sky. Looks like the clouds are coming again. It's raining. Have a nice day. I'm tired today. 2 weeks ago, we worked like hell. We slept in trailers. The foreman told us to go home and gave everyone the day off for tomorrow. Despite the fact that the time was over 0 o'clock, no one stayed. We quickly packed up and got on the road to our native village without any accidents. With dreams of a cozy bed, soft pillows of his blood. And you with your nonsense to the working people and your eyes only poked at the departing man. And he and Seeds leisurely wandered along the village houses on the asphalted path. Then he turned to the field pipe and quickened his step. The approach of bad weather Peter felt in his gut immediately began to catch his bones. He sighed heavily, lamented the fact that there was almost no heat this year. He closed the wicket behind him to the fiddler and entered the house. He lived alone. He went out with a lot of girls and got married late, already over 30. But the spouse to marry wanted a city life, prosperous, bright, and she ran away with a visiting small businessman who brought fresh bread from his bakery to the village store. How did Jenna live? He didn't know now. Pride didn't allow him to ask, and there wasn't much interest. During 5 years of married life, he had become familiar with her character and preferences. His wife tended to idleness, loved money and entertainment. Where did the simple-minded girl get such a craving? Take a wild guess. Peter felt sorry for her at one time. I thought she was miserable, but she's a sly fox. And she turned out to be. Before he met her, he was working. He quietly ignored the laughs of his coworkers. They called him eternal. That's what they called him. He was almost 38 years old, and he was still single. His parents had long since passed away, leaving him a good house on the outskirts of the village. Right behind him, a clear river and forest spread out under the enemy. In love with fishing, Peter used to leave his tractor at the house and rush to primitive places. For rafting on the river, he had a boat, and for fishing, he had a whole fishing arsenal. Fishing rods, hooks, and spinning rods, a comfortable inflatable mattress, a kettle, a folding knife, and other utensils. And there was no greater joy for a man than to fish away from people. Such a journey of a few days would inspire him for a long time. Or that passion for this hobby, tired and satisfied, returned. Peter Homeland. And then the man began another hunt and hunting for skirts. Peter had different and country maidens, blood and milk and city skinny fugitives and figure skaters, thick lips and pumped in all places madams, and Mademoiselle's female tribe reached out to a strong country man, stately with a powerful torso, wiry muscular arms. Peter was a titbit for voluptuous or lonely ladies, and his appearance was textured, strong-willed chin, golden curls, open forehead, clear blue eyes and teeth. His smile left no one indifferent, and the tractor driver's soul was wide, as they say. He could go for a walk. He could play the harmonica to make mature women cry and tango with young girls. In general, it could seem that he was an inveterate heartthrob and Casanova. But no, just did not look into the soul. He was clinging to his pants and human gut little. Babes were interested in and did not guess his partners that this brat has long been longing for true love. He wanted to start a family and bring up children. In his yard lived an old greyhound Alma, abandoned in the forest in winter by city hunters. And at home he sheltered 3 cats, striped, red, and white. And Peter loved children very much. Couples left their offspring for him to look after. Peter sat with them like a babysitter, while they went to the movies or went shopping in town. He added so that all the village children, when they saw him in the street, stretched their hands to the giant. After all, he could ride on himself and play catch-up and toss in the air, but he could not meet his woman Peter. I decided that since my heart did not twitch when I was young, now probably it was not destined. He jumped all over women, but he didn't get any serious relationships. He was alone in the yard. He came home late one night, drunk as a skunk, took a photo calendar with a famous young man on it. A photo calendar with a famous comedian, and started talking to him. I'm bitter. Everyone has a family, children, and I'm like a finger. All alone in the world. Many other things, he said. And he shed a tear. And then he fell asleep that night with a calendar in his hands. And he dreamed as if he were near the windows in the field on soft blood under the trees in the shade. 12 o'clock, and his lunch is next to him at a clean rehearsal. A strip of black bread young, green with heads of onions, radish, and also scatter red boiled potatoes, country eggs, and partisans, thin slices of lard with a good meat layer of fat. Lifted up and ate with appetite, considering the boundless wind skiss, the field, and the clear blue sky above him, next to him tractor of his stand's engine, shut off rests his breadwinner. And then he sees the ears at his side stirring, and the comedian from the portrait materialized in front of him. He poked him in the chest and said, "Don't worry, remember, soon everything will change in your destiny. For the best." Peter woke up in the morning and a familiar face looked at him from the photo. The man smiled. He remembered the drunken conversation with the calendar and the dream. He'd made it. He was surprised. I talked to pictures at night. However, since that day, the longing and anxiety went away, and Peter began to wait for what was promised to him. A change of life for the better. Not really, and so it left me curious for a laugh. How could it be that things had changed for him? The single way of life became habitual, and in early September, a trainee from the agricultural technical school appeared in the village. And her name was Jenna, and she was young and pretty. Peter was 20 years older than her father. She had a lot of suitors from the countryside. They flocked to the young girl like bees to honey. You'd think a city slicker was new. It's hot, I get it. You can't get them with pressure. I made friends with her. I drove her in the morning on a tractor to a distant mill, and in the evening picked her up and took her to the village, where the chairman allocated her a room at the village council. One evening, Peter picked up the girl, and before getting into the tractor, they stood in the field for a while, admiring the red-pink sunset, the first stars and young ones sunning themselves in the sky. There was the scent of herbs in the air and a special autumn silence. Soon the cold weather would come, the work in the fields would be over, and Jenna would have to leave for town. Peter looked at the girl without taking his eyes off her. Okay, I'm all pretty, smelling of hay and honey. The saucer's eyes were bright gray, looking at him trustingly, as if waiting for help. The whole atmosphere around them disposed to frankness, and told him Jenna that she got pregnant from the local suitor, and he left her in such a position. She cried, hugged him tightly, leaned her head on his shoulders, and such a romantic mood swept over the man that he pressed the girl to him, gently stroked her shoulders, and kissed her on the lips. The man was afraid to frighten her away, and that state of happiness, which seemed like a misty haze, encompassed him, fell evil into his heart. The hope of a normal family also appeared. A nobility surged up in him, and immediately he offered the girl to marry him. Jenna didn't seem surprised. She accepted easily, and Peter's coworkers were genuinely happy for him. Well, at last you were about Koltsov howling, so they sang at his wedding as if for the last time. The celebration turned out to be wide and hearty, and the young couple's life was going well at first. Jenna told her husband that the pregnancy had terminated. It was due to stressful experiences. It was only later that Peter found out that there was no such thing at all, and all the wife to marry. In the city, she was teased for saying that she had collected all the beds, but had not found a husband. So she decided to rub their noses in it. She saw a sentimental tractor driver and immediately realized she had to take him. Then I often wondered how to take him. A young girl. I'm a fool, Peter complained. I got married once and immediately stepped on a rake. He sighed heavily and went to the window. Still, the jam was building. The rain had densely dined after a hard day's work. Peter climbed under a warm blanket and fell soundly asleep. The overwork had not gone to waste, and even in the realm of Morphia, Peter continued to drive his tractor. Driving along a golden field, dedicated to the bright rays of the sun, suddenly something very strange happens. In an instant, the road is enveloped in darkness, appearing in the light of the headlights. The road changes as if in a movie or montage with a change of frame. Around the unsightly darkness overboard mournfully blows the wind on the ground. The fog begins to flow. Peter looks back, none of his own are there, as if dissolved, and the lights of the village behind appeared. What is this attack? A reasonable explanation comes to the man's mind. He got weak and fell asleep, and that's what he saw. He starts the tractor, turns around and starts moving back towards the village. He pulls up, and again there's a mystery. The scenario repeats itself. Darkness all around in the light of the headlights, bushes, and behind. Peter turns off the engine, takes out a bottle of water, splashes it on his face and head. I don't understand what's going on. It's like believing in an evil force. They're taking me around in circles. The clock is ticking, and I am stuck in one place. With such thoughts, Peter left the tractor and went home on foot. He collapsed on the bed and passed out. In my dream, I saw myself walking in the direction of the village along a path familiar from childhood, where I knew every tree, sighed at the aroma of fresh grass, admired the windows of the forest in the distance. Suddenly, the air thickens around him. Within seconds, it becomes so dense that Peter can't see anything around him. He is overcome with intense anxiety. At a loss, he stops and tries in vain to see the road in the darkness. Suddenly, a woman's hand reaches out to him through the cloud curtain. She beckons him after her. A chilling terror grips the man. But like a mesmerized man, he follows her. In time, the personal veil dissipates, and he sees the unfamiliar face of the woman. She stares intently into his eyes and insistently nods her head in the direction looming ahead of his house, points to a bench near an old barn. Peter takes a few steps forward, turns around, and is surprised to find that no one is around. The man follows the path further, but it suddenly turns into a thin stream that murmurs its waters and goes right under the barn. Peter is stuck in a dream, shuddering, and finally wakes up, wiping his sweat. He was awakened by the sound of the wind. It was disturbing the poles of the ones with big tens of birch, aspen, bird cherry, and tree branches. The force was beating on the window. Suddenly, the street lamps in the whole village went out, and the light was cut off. Pitch-black darkness descended on the land. A violent thunderstorm raged behind. Everything around was shaking. It seemed that the sky was cracking into pieces. Close thunder struck, and the man shuddered. The room glowed with flashes of lightning. It was raining like a bucket. Peter couldn't sleep a wink. Anxiety gripped the downpour, and then it subsided and then intensified. I must be afraid and unable to sleep because of the deafening rumble, he thought. Suddenly, lightning struck somewhere close by. But after a while, there was a pause. The rain eased, the storm abated. Suddenly, Peter put his hand over his eyes. What's that? There was a burst across the room. A bright light, silvery white. Peter had never seen anything like it in his life. An oil painting, grandiose, mesmerizing. Very close, about 10 meters outside the bedroom window. He saw a ball-shaped, glowing object floating in the air. It was about 15 centimeters in size. The airy misty cloud moved slowly. It seemed to the man that the vision was swaying from side to side. It receded and the glow grew smaller. It drew closer and the room filled with light. Peter fell into a state of stupor. He couldn't move, but still he found the strength and ducked under the blanket, then popped out of there. Every 5 seconds, he felt that he was confronted from below by a natural phenomenon of some universal mystery. For a split second, the balloon hung. It froze in the air, as if studying the man on the other side of the ocean, and then smoothly vibrating began to move through the air. Everything lasted for about 5 minutes. Then the phenomenon jerked to the side and disappeared without a trace. Darkness fell. Only the sounds of rain could be heard. There were rare flashes of lightning in the distance. The rain stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Dawn was breaking over the village. Bright pink and purple streaks, alternating with each other, lit up the sky. Dumbfounded by what he saw, Peter cautiously approached the window, opened it. The smell of fresh greenery wafted into the room. He went back to bed, put his hand under the pillow, and finally fell asleep. The next day, the man talked excitedly about the ball lightning. Now he was not afraid at all. Who are the men in the brigade? Oh, who laughed, not believing what you want, guys. It's raining this year, there's no salvation. They're slowing down the harvest. Tonight they promise rain again. That's what happened. It was after midnight when Peter went home from the fields. Suddenly the sky was ablaze with lightning, flashing in bizarrely zigzagging dashes of thunder. It seemed as if the entire universe wanted to fall into tatters. Then streams of water collapsed from the heavens, covering everything around with it. Peter shuddered a couple times at the wheel and then stopped. He was very tired and in a hurry to get home. Suddenly he shuddered. There was a movement nearby. Then he thought he saw a fireball in the distance. Peter stopped and realized his mistake. Only unseemly darkness loomed ahead. Lightning striking mine. A strange thunderstorm, he wondered. I haven't seen anything like it in a long time. It was an unsightly night. It seemed to him that he was the only witness to a powerful manifestation of natural forces. Peter stood on the side of the road for a few minutes. He was jerked out of his deep reverie by a movement on the road ahead. He looked closely. It was the figure of a woman coming toward him. When he saw her close, he realized that the tramp was performing a dance to the rain music that she understood. It was either her crying or moaning, or her thrusts and laughter, that reached the man. The sight was fantastic and eerie. I wish the rain would stop, he thought. For the second day, it's been dashing after me. Peter even rubbed his eyes. Was it just me? Meanwhile, the stranger continued to move through the downpour, ignoring the storm. Her body shuddered in a nervous, ritualistic dance. It was then that Peter noticed that the girl had a baby in her arms. The man jumped into the tractor, threw his work jacket over his head, immediately jumped off the ground and hurried toward her. Do you need to hide? Come to my place. The child will get sick, he shouted, trying to break the noise of the rain. Through the downpour, the man did not hear the young woman's reply. He held out his arms towards her. She handed him the little girl. Pitifully, she smiled and followed him. In the inn, he found a clean, large towel and wrapped it around the child well, always kept it ready for bathing in the river. And this year, he never had to. It was all the weather's fault. It was capricious. He looked at the baby in his arms. It was a girl, crying all the time, but very quietly. I guess her strength was wearing off. Peter drove them to his house and put the key in the woman's hands. He went to fetch the paramedic. He realized that Peter had been wandering along the highway with her child for more than an hour. Though the rain was warm, it was very long. It was easy to get cold and simple. The downpour was still beating furiously on the tractor. Streams of water were flowing down the road. Peter picked up the pace. The way lay back to the field. There Helen, the village paramedic, was staying there today with her lover. Peter himself had seen the woman dive into his carriage since the evening. The tractor driver's fatigue was imposing and confusing his consciousness. He fought hard against sleep the whole way. When the man reached the place, physically he felt better. He jumped sharply out of the car and ran to the construction wagon at the edge of the field in an excited state. Peter didn't realize he was banging on the window with all his might. "Did you eat too many pancakes? It's night, and you're banging like crazy. I opened the tape. Come on, it's urgent. I picked up a woman and a child on the highway. The girl's a baby. I think she's sick. I'll get my bag and get dressed." "Wait," the paramedic commanded. Soon she was already sitting in the tractor next to Peter. He told her to hold on and gave her gas. "We'll be there soon," he said, glancing at the victorious woman. Back at home, Peter was at a loss for words. A drenched child lay on the bed, and the woman he had picked up was spinning around the room singing. Frowning, her eyebrows flew upward in surprise. But she was not confused. Rushed to examine the baby. First thing she did was to take off all her wet feathers. Peter took a soft towel out of the closet and half-handed it to her. She put her finger to the baby's back and put it to her lips. Her breathing was normal. After a few minutes, she stated, then wiped the baby, tangled it in the towel, and handed it to Peter. Pressed it to her chest, warmed the bottle. "Gotta find the grease mixture, too." She approached the girl, a skinny brunette with big black eyes, swaying from side to side. Her gaze froze. Helen waved her hand in front of her face. There was no reaction. The lady was definitely in shock. "Let's get the baby to a children's hospital, and the woman to a mental institution." Haladina pulled the purse hanging on the stranger's shoulder. Tanya resisted. Inside was a passport and a birth certificate. So one thing at least, the paramedic smiled nicely. In front of us, the child's mother Kelly and the girl Lisa in the column of the father empty-handed. "Okay, Peter, give the foreman a car. Ask. He's home now, but he's laying the other's breasts, and I'll stay here. We can't leave them alone to rest." When he left the house, there was light over the village. The earth was alive. Birds were singing. He was amazed at the change in nature. It was as if the elements that had raged during the night had not existed. The clouds graciously gave way to the rising sun, which put everything in its place. The long-awaited warm day was dawning. What did he have in store for him today? What surprise! He drove his car up to Peter's house. Peter got out Helen with a young girl, and her daughter settled in the cabin. Escorted them to the medical facility. On arrival, she said the girl was very lucky not to catch pneumonia. And the mother's psychotic. It takes a long time to be treated and then observed at the place of residence. Peter was worried about both. No one would let him see the girl, of course. The nurses on duty only reassured him. They said there was no danger to her health, but the head doctor said he could see Kelly, said it would be good for her. The sight of the asylum had a depressing effect on Peter. He was an optimist, and he didn't like to be depressed. But here he even became afraid of physically healthy people in the captivity of their psyche. While Kelly was being treated, he regularly brought her groceries. Soon she began to feel better, and the young woman was allowed to go for walks. At the hospital, there was a small yard with greenery. Emmy neighbors ate next and was still quite young, but made the area cozy. That's where they met. The girl was not much of a talker, but with time she became more open. One day, having chosen a bench in the back of the square, Kelly and Peter settled down next to each other. The girl raised her dark, velvet eyes to him. "I never remembered you, Peter. That day with the rain. But somehow I feel safe in your presence. Please listen to me." Peter nodded. "You know, I believe in letting you into the hidden corners of my soul. You will understand everything. You are a soulful man. I suffered a lot from my mother. She didn't want you to realize your dream." Yeah, she overreacted. She was born into a simple family. Lived in a quiet country town and a house on the outskirts of town. She was always dreaming of the first vivid memories that my mother shared with me, this kindergarten, and shrouded in a haze, romance, the personality of a music worker. The woman seemed like a girl wizard. Not of this world, She appeared once a week extravaganza in an airy outfit with a light gas scarf that accomplished the image of high-heeled shoes. They looked crystal in a child's eyes. Even the educator's name sounded some kind of ethereal music, Angelina. Wendy's mom's throat covered when she opened the lid of the piano and a fairy tale was born. It was astonishing to the ear. Sounds emerged beneath her light hand movements and filled the space. Air castles appeared in the girl's imagination. Mythical characters survived there. It is not surprising that the impressionable Wendy began to dream of playing a musical instrument, but this desire remained buried in her dreams. Soon my grandfather died. My grandmother withdrew into her grief. She worked at the factory to support herself, and my mother kept a vegetable garden, rabbits, chickens. She also sewed to order. Nights became Mom's childhood no fun. She grew up inconspicuous, shy, insecure, and all the time longed for music. After graduating from school, immediately went to work at the factory to her mother. 5 years of perfect labor passed and the unbelievable happened. Wendy was sent from the enterprise to study at the Institute. It was located in a large city. There she found herself for the first time in her life. Of course, it captivated her imagination. The ancient architecture of former merchant houses in the center, powerful streets, cathedrals gilded with domes, shadows, and alleys planted with spruce and birch trees, and the gift of fate. The building of the Institute was opposite the conservatory. The sweet voices of wind instruments, harp, flute, saxophone, and piano, carried from the open windows into the fall square. After class, Wendy loved to sit on the bench and listen to the music. That's how she immersed herself in her dream. The years flew by. Mom finished her studies, got her diploma. She returned to her home harbor. She was transferred to work in the laboratory and was again rewarded for her hard work. Now she was given a voucher to a sanatorium. At the resort, the girl was lucky to touch the captivating world of music again. Every evening in the assembly hall of the sanatorium, young pianist gave concerts for vacationers. He seemed to Luba then the ideal man, real knight. Undoubtedly, he noticed the girl with adoration, looking at him. The musician was bribed by this, and he approached her and got acquainted. His name was Tom. It is clear that the mother became his most devoted fan and admirers of his talent. Tom for this allowed after concerts to walk with him to his house. And soon Wendy became like a shadow everywhere to accompany his idol. However, the vacation came to an end. She returned home. There the girl terribly longed for her pianist, then and began to write him letters. They remained unanswered. But one day, returning from work, she saw the adored genius near her house. He had arrived. It was the happiest moment in Mom's life. Grandmother did not share her joy, and the same day in the evening at dinner, directly in the forehead, asked the guest about the purpose of his appearance. The intelligent musician did not give an answer. But soon Tom gallantly added on one knee and giving Luba a silver ring asked for her hand. The girl could not believe her happiness in the rapture. She became dizzy. From the overflow of higher feelings, she cried. Soon the bride and groom signed and played a modest wedding. Tom began to work in the Palace of Culture. He liked to tell his provincial colleagues about his great talent, emphasizing what unique hands he had, what graceful long fingers. Meanwhile, my mother became pregnant with me with delight. She shared this glad tidings with her husband, but he did not share it. The young woman was instructed by him to go for an abortion. She cried all night. She fell asleep just before dawn, resigned to her husband's decision. In the morning, he was blown away. All that was left was a scanty note. Yes, yes. She ran away from such a life in a backwater, where there's no place to realize her genius. This is not what I dreamed of. Goodbye. After reading the message, my mother fainted. She and I never heard from that man again. Physically, however, Wendy was strong and soon recovered from the emotional shock. She gave birth on time and without complications. It took her a long time to choose a name for her baby girl, named her Kelly. My mother and grandmother raised and educated me as if I were porcelain. The accent was on my hand, which they carefully guarded from the houses, nurturing my father's talent in me. I couldn't play in the sandbox, pick up snow to make snowballs. I wasn't allowed to wash dishes, do laundry, cook meals. And from an early age, I was put in music school. Grandmother, yielding to the persuasions of my mother, handed over all her savings to buy an instrument. The piano was installed in a prominent place in the hall by the window. Mom carefully dusted it every day. She was carried away in her thoughts. Her daughter would fulfill her dream. It would be happiness. The musical accompaniment would accompany her whole life. It would be by all means at all costs. In public school, from the first day I was exempt from all labor duties, cleaning classrooms, subotniks, and the like. Immediately after lessons I took home, changed one briefcase for another, and went to the museum. The fact that no one asked my opinion and desire, I got used to it. But the wild thing was that in the class together with me there were girls and boys who also received musical education. But they led normal lives. They had childhood, walks, splinters on their hands, fingers frozen in the cold. My mom wouldn't let me do anything, obsessed with her dream. I couldn't even participate in the school theater. She thought it was unworthy of her daughter's talent. So I became an outcast, forced to ignore my peers. I was disliked by my childhood group for the same reason I never had any friends. I grew up surrounded by sheet music, violin clefs, gams, adagio, and solfeggio. As a teenager, my classmates openly laughed at me. I tried to break out of the vicious circle by proving to my mom that I dreamed of something of my own and didn't want to do music, but she ignored all my needs. Her plans were only to continue her musical education. And then I started to have psychological problems. I didn't talk much, and soon I became completely withdrawn. And after the death of my grandmother, left alone with my mother and her tyranny, I found lapses in memory. And most likely, I'm a somnambulist. I started waking up in different places, even though I was in my own bed. One early morning, I was horrified to see the piano smashed to pieces. Unconsciously, I took revenge on the instrument for years of willfulness. I don't know what my mother would have done to me at that moment if I hadn't run away. I left my music school graduation certificate on the piano with a note, "Mom, is your dream come true? This document is rightfully yours. I'll go to technical school." In the city, I quietly studied there for 3 years, choosing to grow up. I dare to major in construction here. See what kind of hands I have. Masochists are to never sit at the piano again. All this time, I had no contact with my mom. Even when I got married, I didn't give her my address. I was afraid of the reproaches of mental oppression. True, I wrote letters to her regularly. After graduating from technical school, I left with my fiancé to his hometown. There she married him, gave birth to Lisa. But the psychological problems remained. At the beginning of my married life, everything seemed to disappear, and then pregnancy, childbirth, and everything escalated. My husband discovered I was walking around at night. He left us. He wouldn't even give up our daughter. Wouldn't let me write him down as the father. Said he didn't want crazy people in his family. What can I say? He finished me off with my daughter. I worked nights as a plasterer, beating her in the stroller, swinging her leg beside me. What can you do? We have to live somehow. It's been like that for almost 6 months. I decided to return to my native land. We were robbed on the road, thrown on the side of the road. That's where you picked me up. Thank you, you saved me. Who knows what would have happened to us if it hadn't been for you? Probably dead. And now I've been examined here and found to have a neurological disease. Rare and frightening. So I'm forced to plead with you. I need to keep Lisa out of an orphanage. I need you to find my mother. I can't see her. But Wendy, I'll write down the address. I'm afraid she'll want to ruin her granddaughter like she ruined me in favor of empty dreams. But I have nowhere to go. Will you help? Of course, Kelly answered the man. I feel responsible for the people found in the rain. He returned to Lviv. In deep thought, he went to the Brokas, but took a few days at his own expense. He didn't want to let the foreman go. He had a lot of work to do, but he gave in. The man asked for a long shake in the train, and then in the bus, finally arrived in his native town Ol. He found Lubov Nevzhin's house not at once. Streets, winding, neglected on the outskirts. Opened him a gray-haired woman. Eyes big as a saucer, black look, sad, trim, modestly dressed. Peter said hello and told her what had brought him to her. Wendy acted and staggered back. I never thought Helen would call me. Yes, you come through. Nevisian sat the guest at the table, gave him a hearty tea face, moved closer, eating strawberries, jam, and honey on a plate with sliced fresh loaf. Over the conversation and acquaintance, the man learned that Wendy had as much idea about her daughter's life as she did about becoming a grandmother. She handed Peter an envelope with a letter from her daughter, but she hesitated to initiate contact with Kelly, afraid of being rejected. Now, through the story of the stranger who became her own, she realized how much damage she had done to her own family with her violence, and that only by choice. People should choose their own affairs, professions, and hobbies. How did Kelly get away from me? She told Peter. So the country collapsed in an instant. The factory was closed, bankrupt. It was a tragic time. I was left without a job. I survived by selling household utensils from home, dishes, sets, crystal. My own vegetable garden, of course, helped me grow potatoes and vegetables. And here I was walking from the bazaar, thinking that I could buy dinner with the proceeds. It started to rain. I ran into the entrance of the first house, and in the darkness ran into someone, frightened, turned on the flashlight. And in front of me, the girl Zareknaya told me that she hid here from the bad weather. I was upset. I invited her to warm herself. We got to know each other. It turned out that she had come from the village to study here, and they didn't give her a dormitory. In search of shelter, she got lost in a town she didn't know very well. I thought about it and rented Tatiana a room. Helen's daughter was empty anyway, so I got an apartment, which modestly paid for accommodation, but brought village lard, milk, sour cream to the house. And everyone shared in the good fortune. The need receded. We became close. Tanya, she is simple, very light, pleasant in communication. She grew up in a religious family. In her room, which I gave to her, icons, left brought from home. At first it seemed strange to me that the girl prayed before meals in the morning and when she went to bed. When shall I go to get my granddaughter with you? Peter, may I? I live now, I'm not poor, and I have a pension and a job. Yes, you can go in the evening in time for the Suburban, and there it's a short walk. The children's hospital is in the center of town, and the dispensary is on the outskirts. And the street will meet me. Let me take home with Hope, the woman asked. Of course, I think she's forgiven me. She's a good girl. Oh, and guilty. I cried in front of her. Wendy, will I be able to redeem myself, Peter? She looked up at the guest with sad eyes, God willing, to encourage him. He her packed quickly, arrived at the train at the right time. They bought tickets, listening to the rumble of the wheels of the train. They admired nature through the window. Wendy and Peter looked at each other occasionally and were silent. Everyone was thinking about their own things. In Minsk, the grandmother happily took her little treasure in her arms. The baby's face was smeared with something. Wendy washed her and changed into a new one. That bought on the way to communion with her granddaughter lighted her heart with joy. It was evident by the amusement on the woman's face. Peter also started a lezginka, sitting on a bench in the hospital square. Feeding from a bottle they had been given in the nursery. Soon the baby sweetly fell asleep while playing on his mighty chest, and an hour later mother and daughter came out of the central entrance holding hands, smiling at each other. But thank God, everything was resolved well, Peter thought. The women approached him. Kelly took her daughter from Peter's arms. Tears ran down her cheeks. Thank you, Peter. She thanked him. You're an amazing man, and an amazing man. That's what I would say, Wendy added. You put us back together as a family? Come on, Peter was embarrassed. I am so God's fate, smiled Nevzhin. I realized it exactly when I turned to the Virgin Mary. I read a prayer and listened to it. I can't explain it in words, but at that time my soul turned over. I started to go to temples often, hurried to the service, and fell in love with the choir. Tears flowed beyond my will. I became a parishioner of this temple with prayer. Peace settled in her soul, but not tangible and comprehensible to the mind. The strength came to learn, to love truly not hypocritical neighbors, to accept with selfishness, to fight. I spent a lot of energy in my life on the phantom dream of music. But instead of working hard myself and getting closer to this world, to participate, I went the other way. Only now it's come to me that a quiet soul is the best music in the world. Why have you joined the temple choir? Peter suggested it. Yes, I've been in it for about a year now. I have a good voice and ear. I approached them. Oh, that's the finger of God. The man marveled. After a warm farewell, he looked at the women's backs for a long time, then sighed happily, got up from the bench, and walked toward the bus station. There was his own story waiting for him there, a cozy home and a hard but beloved job. With this, the man was in perfect harmony. He loved and knew his work. And in the village, he was appreciated and respected for this. However, as usual, there is a bad luck for the old woman. Georgie had an accident in the field. He received multiple fractures in his leg. A number of operations were performed, and little by little, the man began to recover. Once, returning from the clinic, he was standing on the highway, voting the bus had already left, and the next one had to wait for a while. It was hot June, even under the awning of the bus stop. The people around him did not pay attention to him. He waved his crutch, trying to stop anyone. There were no attempts. A gray Opel drove by, but then it backed up and slowed down. There was a girl behind the wheel. Peter regarded her with interest and appreciation. She bent over the back of the seat and opened the back door on the curbside. He stood beside her at a loss, wondering how to get into the car. Help, the stranger asked. Peter shook his head negatively. He barely squeezed in sideways and put his crutches beside him. I have to go that way to the village. He showed his hand to the thief. The girl smiled. I'll take you there in a breeze. She drove the car well, smoothly changed speeds. What's your business here? Have not seen before, he asked. Peter was intrigued. It was not often in their backwoods pretty girls appeared. The man looked at her all the way. Nice features, Greek profile, long dark hair down to her waist. She turned in green eyes for a moment. A flicker of slyness. Where are you going? She asked again. Her voice was low and husky, quite pleasant and mesmerizing. He showed me where to go, explained where his house was. Parked the car at the gate. The girl got out, walked around it, and helped Peter out of there. Took his crutches and gave him a hand. He climbed out, thanked her. Peter opened the wicket and beckoned her to follow him. Didn't hesitate to have a nice cup of tea. With me it will be by the way. I won't refuse. Peter got around the house better than he did on the street. Adapted to the kettle for 6 months. Arranged vases of candy and jam on the table. Thinly sliced a fresh loaf of bread that he had bought in town. The girl sat opposite, and he was able to get a better look at her thin face with correct features, open forehead, sobianin, and eyebrows. Slightly slanted eyes with long lashes, plump lips, accurate chin. Figure. The stranger had a frail neck and long arms. What's your name with the visitor? If it weren't for you, it certainly would be now. From the heat and the pain. Lisa, but to drink tea or juice, it's delicious. On rags. The girl drank with pleasure and went to the yard of the barn, sat there on a bench. Peter cleared the table and went out after her. Percy came and stood beside her. Lisa leaned back against the wall, closed her eyes. She had a detached look. She didn't wake up right away. Coming out of the book, she smiled. Can I sit here? You have 5 more minutes here, then I'll leave. Peter nodded. Only I'll go into the house. I'm tired of Lezginka. Go. Peter went into the bedroom and lay down. Immediately fell asleep, not hearing the sounds of the engine and the cars driving away. And nice girl's man after, and did not remember. The meeting was accidental, so he was surprised when she appeared near his house again. Peter heard the rumble of a car, saw Lisa through the window. She came into the yard. She had a large bag in her hands, which she lowered onto the porch. Peter limped to the door, swung it open. The guests again settled on the bench. A lovely slyness flickered in her gaze. She lifted her head, stretched slightly. But this is for you. Lisa stood up and opened her bag. There were groceries in there. Jorah's face stretched. What's the daughter for? Don't be shy. It's cheaper in town. Then here. And you can't go there, you can't see. The main thing is a lot. Thanks, I'll give you the money. No, it's okay. It's a gift. Put it in the fridge. Can I help you? Yeah, I can handle it. Sit down and rest. Let me see the big one. There was a lot of stuff in it. Cheese, sausage, stew, canned fish, and vegetables. In a couple of minutes, Peter's small old refrigerator was filled to the brim with them. While he was pulling everything out and distributing it, he looked at the girl through the window. Lisa froze in one pose. Peter put the kettle on the stove for some soup. He wanted to feed the girl. How did he finish it? He took out the crumbs and cut the cheese and sausage on a plate. He heard she was leaving. Till I got out of the house, I didn't know what to think of compassion. Strong girl, though. Too bad I didn't get her in the mail. But she disappears so fast, and she comes out of nowhere, too. This meeting disturbed Peter. It seemed extraordinary, even though he'd seen Lisa. A couple of times he was surprised by the young girl's demeanor of unperturbed calmness. No matter how hard Peter tried to put thoughts of her out of his mind, thinking that she might never appear. They arose again. In the evenings, he sat on the bench for a long time, immersed in his thoughts. And at night, he slept badly. Lisa came again. Peter was in the yard at that time. The girl smiled at him openly and good-naturedly, already as a close acquaintance. In the depths of her green eyes played the reflections of the bright summer sun. The look was warm. She said hello nonchalantly, and Peter suddenly became verbose. Thank you for your help with the groceries. How much do I owe you? It's embarrassing, he asked, stammering. Lisa looked him in the face. Please, you don't need anything, she replied. What should I call you? Oh, whatever you like. Uncle Peter the tractor driver, or Peter. It's fine, and you're fine. I can't think of anything better. Peter, let me come and sit here in your yard sometimes. It's no big deal. Come over, Lisa, whenever you want. I'm home all the time. This time she sat on the bench with her arms spread and closed her eyes. Peter went into the house and occasionally looked at her. The girl did not live in the sun under a light summer breeze. The man tried to invite her for a cup of tea, but she refused and said goodbye to him. For more than a week, the girl did not appear, and Peter caught himself thinking that he missed Lisa. When she arrived, he couldn't hide the joy on his face. The first thing Lisa asked him was how he was feeling. She inquired about your sore leg. I can examine it. Such interest in his problem surprised Peter. But as if under hypnosis, he showed her the sore leg. The girl took out of her purse a piece of clean cloth, some solution, paper napkins. Trust my hands, she said. Her touch had a healing power. Peter felt it at once, as if something new and unexplored, but graceful and strong, had entered his flesh. Outwardly, her manipulations looked like an ordinary massage. But Peter realized it was more than that. He could not explain his sensations clearly. Lisa came twice a week and treated him. Each time Peter enjoyed her warmth and gentle strength. He realized that his well-being was getting better day by day. Often the girl delivered groceries. Sometimes volunteered to mop the floors of the house, picked up large loads of laundry, and took them to town for washing, returning them to perfect wives. It was time for Peter to go back to work. The leg was as good as new. More was gone. The doctors, looking at the x-rays, marveled at how well the bones had fused and how quickly the right amount of movement in the limb had been restored. Peter, with redoubled energy, began to do his favorite work. He jumped into the tractor, where the sunlight fell in streaks on his loaded sheets. His oil-soaked hands started the engine on his rough face. His eyes sparkled victoriously. To himself, he would seem a hero, and he felt that any task was within his reach. Once again, as before. For lunch again, his favorite potatoes with smoked Celtic. He would leave her, praising her. Then gazed up into the sky at the clouds twisted into bizarre figures. It felt good and breathed so easily. He watched the eagle soar over the field in the hot air. Peter didn't take his eyes off it until it was hidden in the thick outermost tree, lonely, standing by the roadside. Life is a wonderful thing, joyfully said the tractor driver, drinking his favorite song. So day by day winter came. It was snowy and severe. There was a lot of work to do. Peter left the engine of the tractor running overnight. In the morning, Frost promised, as usual, you can't start it. It would have to be heated. And this is time and effort. Every day is like another. When outside, pulled deeper on his head woolen cap or something from behind the gift through a hood on top and forward. In winter, the chairman transferred him to the snowplow so that he would not get bored without work. Tomorrow we will have to clear the road to the neighboring village. Snowfalls in this winter were not less than the rains in the past summer and fall. That's why Peter did not get out of the cabin for days and days, sometimes finishing late at night. And at 4 o'clock the phone cackled. "Come on, Peter, save the day." Neighbors swamped or something else. Peter, swearing profusely, rushed to help. It happened to pull out cars from snowdrifts. There were times when he had to dig out the road to villages. People locked in the snowy captivity became harsh and stingy. Without auto shops and a letter carrier, they lived the worst of all for the sick. The paramedic could only get there on skis. Ambulance rejected and calls, because anyway not to reach, and there is no one. The medical center was closed after optimization. So just yesterday, he went to shovel the white captivity from the snow. Got in his eyes. Suddenly a big hillock appeared on the way. The tractor driver, with a shovel under the light of headlights, quickly dug out an old foreign car. I looked out the window and there was the driver. I shake his hand, dropped his head on the steering wheel and slept an eternal sleep. Peter called the traffic police, described the situation. I moved on. We've got to do our own thing, clean the road. Christmas is coming. The snow is hard as concrete. Sometimes I had to stand. The wheels decided to turbocharge the turbo function. The diesel tractor roared. Here we go, finally. Turned the front blade and rushed at the enemy. Snow layers were removed, and as if on oil steel blade surrendered with a squeak. Peter felt the excitement. He coped with the elements. And then the engine stalled. It's a couple of kilometers from the highway. Peter looked at the fuel gauge. Fuel's gone, stretching both tanks to zero. Not far behind the pine trees, God is peeking through. The loafers. The tractor driver rushed to it, and they're covered with tarpaulin, barrels of diesel fuel. To his joy, the car started easily. He drove up to the tractor, pumped the fuel with an electric pump, cleaned his black hands with snow, wiped the rest of the dirt with a rag, and plowed all night like Papa Carlo. In the morning buses, private cars and trucks should go along the highway. Yes, I wanted to rest, but the sowing season was ahead. As they say, the day feeds the year. We have to work on all fields, and there are only a few tractor drivers. But every year the rooks start to walk the field with an important look. The main business of his life begins. The sun warms the soil and a wide ruler descends. And so it goes. Didn't have time to get into the house, to brush the snow off his shoes, and there's the familiar noise of the rider's engine. Lissa, despite the fatigue of the madly at once to meet Lisa, opened Peter in the New Year's Eve, when the city was preparing for the holiday, and people hurried to buy provisions and gifts in supermarkets, and at bus stops jostled in lines. The city was drowning in bustle. Life was bustling. She picked up groceries in her store. She had worked there for a long time. It was possible to buy on account of her salary. She bought Peter a warm scarf and went home. By evening, she planned to go to Olkan. It had snowed so much the day before that she couldn't dig out her horse. She put it off for later. Now she was in a dilemma whether to wait for the bus or to walk home. While she was thinking, a car parked nearby, and she got in the back. She didn't think about the fact that the cab was in the wrong place. Why next to the sidewalk and not at the bus stop? "Where are we going?" he asked. The cab started easily and drove leisurely along the avenue. Retro songs were playing on the radio. The driver was silent. Suddenly, though, he asked, curious, "You work? That's a strange question." She responded. However, the interlocutor did not lag behind. "Come on. There are a lot of young people out of work these days. You're interestingly married." "I'm sorry," and after a pause. "But you're not one of those gloomy depressives. Your eyes are shining. They're beautiful. Are you looking at me? Relax, I'm a grown man. I know what it's like to be with a girl, not a couple. It's just that time flies faster and more pleasant when we talk." The driver looked at her in the mirror and drove on in silence, for which Lisa was very grateful. The snow-covered city flashed outside the window. Different colored lights were dressing up the shop windows. There was a light frost outside, and the car was warm and cozy. The girl's eyes began to slip shut. She woke up to a sudden braking. The cab driver turned to her wide cheekbones and face and smiled full mouth. Maybe a cell phone, or some money, or a license plate. Lissa laughed, holding out the bills to him. "Happy New Year." Slamming the door, she swung the wicket door open and stepped into the house. Here it is bountiful, warmth, and coziness close at hand. "Are you here yet?" Grandma Wendy knew how to guess her as far as she could. "I came to get some goodies for the table. How are you doing?" "I've been beating myself up and feeding myself, and looking good in the yard. I'm going to the old ladies. Whose street parties? It's not the month of May. You all quarrel, freeze, and something. And looking for adventures on them. It's not without that. You're bored with just one dog. You're not alone, Grandma. You have me." Lissa walked over to the woman and fixed her shoulder-length hair. "Aha, she's always missing. Can't even wait for you after work." "Yeah, I can, and I just got asked out on a date." The girl decided to switch her grandmother's attention from grousing to pleasant topics and told her about the cab driver. "Lissa, it's common knowledge. You're irresistible. So it's no surprise that a man would fall for you." "Oh, come on, the cabbie's a one-time thing. Why don't you tell me who you're going out with? You know them all. What's the topic of discussion? You don't respect gossip, do you? Order? No. My granddaughter's on our street." The other day, some dashing teenagers toppled a bench at the end of the street. Bins by the roadside are full. The queen of the family is stirring things up, like they're rocking the whole thing. They're making noise. They're smoking. Keeping the yards awake. We gotta do something. And the other socializing needs to be active too. You're my grandma. Since I stopped singing in the choir, I'm busy with social interests. Yeah, Lisa without them. I don't know how I would have lifted you up. My neighbors helped me. We had such a friendship. We overcame adversity together. We had no men. We became like family to each other. As now I remember my terrible days as I hugged you, pressed against your cheek and closing my eyes, began to breathe, forcing myself deeply to calm down. Tears choked me. Only in you I felt my soulmate. Two lonelinesses found each other. I thought then, what should I do with her? What kind of parent am I to a baby? Life has shown me that no daughter of violence has tortured me. Will I be able to keep my granddaughter from ruining her life? Good, you were calm. You sang peacefully in your sleep and smiled as if you were helping. My heart was clenched with pity, love, and love on the first day that you and I were left alone. I was in so much pain that I carried you into the bedroom. I laid you on the bed and opened your warm balls. You didn't move. The dream was sweet and not vicious. I lay down beside you and forgot myself in an anxious guidance in my head, one by one heavy thoughts about how to lift my granddaughter. That pension was small, and how much was required? Would I have the health and strength? But I wanted so much to help you. I wanted us to be a real family. But in the middle of the night, you cried loudly from emotional distress. The question of what to feed the baby had completely slipped my mind. I frantically remembered who on the street and in which house had infants. Right across the street lived my age Maria. A couple of times we were brought together by fate. Daughters studied at the same school. But as it often happens, they were very different. Her fate was still that, however, still eventually settled down. She married and gave birth to a son. She got a strict, loving spouse. She turned out to be a good mother and wife. Then, leaving you hungry on the bed, I rushed to an acquaintance and knocked on her house. Who's there? Did you hear a sleepy voice? Maria, forgive me for being an old fool, but I'm having a force major, honestly. It's you, Wendy. Wait, I'll be right out. My people are asleep. In a couple of minutes, Maria was listening to me. Oh, what grief forbid, she. Let's go to your place. I have experience with babies. Now only the formula is intercepted we have sometimes when feeding. Even though there's plenty of milk. Sometimes he'll be gone for a while, and he'll be hungry. Look, I made a suggestion. She's the one we don't have enough of sometimes. Why don't we feed her to yours? Yes, of course, thank you, I said. I thank you for your care and kindness. Maria has really helped a lot in taking care of you. You know her, the woman is full of energy. And somehow, without too much pathos and loud words, she became a friend and counselor for us. I watched with admiration how Maria managed her family and did not neglect us. She would bring us milk with our wives, change diapers and rock us and sing us a song. It was always a great help to have you with me. If I had business to attend to, she'd take me for a walk and give me a bath. All in all, she was a woman of gold. One night, after I put you to bed, I went to get her and asked her to go for a walk. She was also free from domestic chores, so she gladly agreed. A passerby along the policy. We got to talking. Maria, I look at you and admire you. Everything in your hands is on fire, everything in your mind. So much fire in you. Why are you alone? Yes, how can I tell you? You remember, my hand was separate and kind of family-oriented. I lived behind him like a stone wall and never knew any trouble. He brought good money into the house. He loved my daughter and respected me. And then everything happened. He went to a sanatorium for treatment, and there he found a young nurse who offered herself to him. And he couldn't resist. He didn't refuse. He went to her. They lived well at first, until the hammer ran away to someone else. Genya, someone came to his senses and came back to me, and I gave him my resignation, and I didn't accept it. I can't live with such a man. Wendy, don't think I'm so proud, but I don't have a heart for him. I'm burned out. There's no point in such a life, only not to fire myself, and so the road to his grandchild is open to him. I don't hinder him. He looks at me with his eyes like a beaten dog, and I feel sorry for him, but I have no love for him, and his deed is always in my memory. Thank God I'm lucky to have a son-in-law. He earns good money. Now he's saving up for an apartment, so he'll bring him into the family and they'll live separately. And I will only have a guest spot, she laughed. And you won't be bored. I asked, you grew up with them. Come on, Wendy, they'll still hang out at my place, as they say nowadays, and kiss at the same time, and I'll make them even better guests. When a son-in-law lives with his mother-in-law and doesn't complain, it says a lot. Yes, Maria, you managed to find a common language with him. And I'm unhappy, but I failed as a wife and a mother. What are you saying? I saw everything. I saw it all happen. We weren't friends, but we lived next door to each other. You can't hide a thing in a bag. You were a good, faithful, and kind wife to yours. Kelly in your teeth. And that she left, that was her choice when she was young. But she came back, forgave you. It's hard to say. Character is a big part of it. And you're not Russian. God himself will help, and I won't leave you. And now you have a granddaughter growing up. She'll squeak and we'll raise a girl. As they say, no matter what steps a cow is sent to, and the phone is still our litter. Thank you, Maria, on a good word. You're 100 times right. My soul has really come to life. At least someone needs my affection, my care, my love. It makes my heart melt and gives me hope. God willing, Lisa will do well in her life. So with our friendship, we outwitted the evil fate of our grandchild. We had and common joys, and wonderful holidays and attention, and care for each other. When you entered school age, God brought us another woman. She had moved to our street from the high-rise buildings. Her health was not good. Her joints were all aching, because in her younger years, when she was born, her first husband was drunk and beat her and drove her out into the street in the cold. She endured until once in the bitter cold, did not get a lifetime of arthritis, and was not infertile. Then the same drunken husband accused her of having no children. This woman did not bear it, left him, and went nowhere, wandering from apartment to apartment. However, she remarried for great love. At work in a railroad depot, one machinist caught the eye of an old, tall widower, who saw only his visible beauty and fell in love. The young people had a real deep feeling for each other. They were so good together that every matter seemed to be on their shoulders and all hardships were surmountable. Fully opening life for each other, they valued every moment spent together. Pardon me for being flat, but this is also important in family life. Although each of them had physical experience of intimacy, it was nothing compared to their intimacy. Even the mental image of their partner evoked such desire that the air seemed to heat up around them. Both considered this meeting a gift from heaven. In order not to lose this fairy tale, they got married. Domesticity did not destroy the idyll. On the contrary, the relationship brought them even closer together. In everything they managed to find a compromise and do not quarrel over nothing. And what did he find in this dosha? People were talking, but he knows his own and almost carries her in his arms. She was persuaded to leave the hard work, and she entered the institute in absentia to become a teacher of junior high school and until her retirement. She worked at the school. She was well regarded by her superiors, and the parents of students approved of her work. But how not to praise her? Vanessa, attentive, kind, though strict woman, could find an approach to each pupil, see something special in him or her, good aim to study, help and guide to the path of truth. Of course, there were envious people who slandered her and made her look bad in front of the director. Her initiative and responsibility irritated many people. People didn't want to work. They were being treated, and the desire to fulfill her duties was regarded as drunkenness and insolence. Vanessa stood her ground. She kept her reputation. No one managed to smear her. She'd still be working after retirement. Except for the joints. Wouldn't let her do it. She used to live in the center on the 5th floor in a well-appointed 2-room apartment. Then a woman was left behind. Her husband died alone. After thinking about it, she decided to move into the house to make it easier to go out. She wanted a change of scenery. He was very sad. She exchanged the house with an extra payment and settled here. We noticed the new one at once during our evening promenades around the neighborhood and took her under our guardianship. We explained to her what the local prices were, how and where it was better to pay off the utility bills, in what stores products are edible, inexpensive, fresh, how to get to the local polyclinic. Vanessa was grateful to us and immediately offered her help to tutor children and grandchildren, math, Russian literature. We were very happy with this offer. Especially, I have never been strong in the sciences, although I have received an education. That's how we became friends. We 3 pensioners are intertwined by our difficult female destinies. We are together everywhere, both in business and on vacation. While I'm with Maria at the window in Vanessa's apartment, she is watching the dinner, watching the children, and checking lessons. So we brought the young people to the point of intelligence. And how we went on vacation together? Remember, we only had Maria with a car and a license. Here she drove, and the rest of us were passengers in their company, and traveled around the monastery inhabitants, had picnics in cozy forest glades, enjoyed fishing. In summer, escaping from the heat, we took a season ticket to the swimming pool and went there 3 times a week. I remember, of course, that's childhood. Are you incorrigible activists? Lissa marveled, but you've told me all this 10 times already. And though it's interesting, I'm gonna run. Have a good one. At least you'll be back by Christmas, because I'm with you on this holiday. Lissa dug out of the snow of his car and drove Peter nestled against his big and hot chest. The man stroked her silky hair. You see, I was foolish young then in the movies. Ran 2 winter was cold. I was wearing a leopard coat and a knitted cap, and I was running through a snowy square. Hurry up and go to the theater. The movie will be interesting. I sat down comfortably, and next to him he was looking at me in a cadet's uniform, and there was laughter in his eyes. And everything swirled in my memory, except for his face. There was nothing. The plot of the movie, and I do not remember the Admiral only from the thought of him sitting next to me. It became more important than what's on the screen. What's your name? He asked boldly after the screening. Lissa, let's go to the cafeteria for a snack. We'll talk about the movie, the stranger suggested. Yeah, you're wrong. All I could talk about was the title of the movie. We wandered the streets for a long time. He told about the service, about the fact that he came for a vacation, and tomorrow he will leave. It's a shame that he came to this movie theater on the last night. If they'd met earlier, things would have been different behind her eyes. Then I would have proposed to you and you would have become my bride. Nick teased. A proposal in the first few hours of dating. That makes sense to me. What does? That you and I are halves who should be one. You know what I mean? in body and soul. I'm leaving tomorrow. Come to the train. I'll be waiting. Of course, I'm your soulmate at home. I couldn't stand it. I told the whole story to my grandmother. I kept saying, "It's an extraordinary meeting. Lissa, have you seen off any suitors in the army? You write him letters, and there's another one." I listened to myself. It was unbearably good, pitiful, painful, and sweet to see Nick off. As promised, I came and told him I'd given my word to another. I was waiting for him. He looked at me in a way you can't tell. In his eyes, I read Wendy, sadness, and disappointment. Then I ran after the train for a long time and cried. Wet snow, driven by a strong wind, whipped my cheeks, as if exacting revenge for the betrayal I had committed, destroying true love. And then I fell seriously and permanently ill. My grandmother was the only thing that saved me. But I have a gift for getting people out of sickness. I don't know how I do it. I cured people from the inside, but I couldn't rid myself of mental illnesses. I saw Nick again. 5 years after the breakup, not a day went by without thinking about him. With the guy, which I in good conscience waited, we parted. It's not for nothing, they say you can't make love by force. He sensed my aloofness and coldness. He realized it and withdrew. I went to work at the store, cooked and cleaned, as if it had always been like that. But that day, lifting my eyes from the cash register, I saw an attractive man walk in who resembled someone. I could not calculate the customer, scrutinizing the face of the guest. Did you fall asleep or what? I was indignant. No, I wasn't asleep. I recognized the man as Nick. He came closer, still the same laugh in his eyes. Yes, he was. He's handsome, well-groomed, smiling. Dark brown hair with blue eyes. Masculine face, straight nose. He looked in my direction. Without hesitating, he glanced at his watch. 7 o'clock sharp. I'm waiting for you near our movie theater. I'm dressed for parade and in a joyful mood. I flew excitedly to my date in a new raw crust dress imitating a lotus flower. Even high heels couldn't keep me on sinful ground. It was like I was arguing. Nick stood with a bouquet of roses. He held them out to me with the words, "Sans, here we go." And then we walked into the movie room. Again, I didn't understand what the movie was about. We kissed in the dark, and then we ran away. He took me to a restaurant. Champagne, gourmet appetizers, fruit, hops were going to my head. Then he began to tell me about himself. After college, he signed up for contract service. Divorced. He was embarrassed a second time. I was horrified, and he laughed. Frankly, it wasn't as serious as we had made it out to be. I hoped we would meet again. I kept looking into my favorite eyes between us melted years of separation, as if we had parted a couple of hours ago. And he's still the same with his eyes mixed in, with a crooked, ironic smile, with a loving heart open towards her. How much is he hiding inside of him? There's no telling. From then on, we never parted again. He came to the store, and we, as if stupefied by the first sense of teenagers, wandered the streets, went to cozy cafes, looking for privacy and a corner there. Grandmother, feeling guilty about our former parting, and in my affliction after him read my sweet granddaughter, "You seem to have blossomed with him. Grab happiness while it lasts. You're really two halves, but don't live in sin. Get married," she said. Soon Nick moved me into his apartment. Grandmother cried then, but let me go with good wishes. For a whole year, the sweet dream lasted, and I didn't want to wake up from it. I didn't believe it at first. It couldn't go on like this for long. I waited for his displeasure, his fated gaze. I cooked it wrong, stroked it wrong, said the wrong thing. But he just laughed and held me tight in his arms. He'd cook, do our laundry, iron our clothes. He liked to look at me when I didn't notice it, said he admired my every movement. I was shocked. How experienced and wise he was. He gave me bouquets and gifts for every occasion. We've only seen them from our husbands as daughters-in-law. Happy West Side colleagues at the store. And recently I began to notice that Nick was looking for solitude. He's become pensive. I talk to him, but he doesn't respond. He's in his own head. He seems to be paying attention to his face. I don't like to hear them ask questions. Allah, so as not to offend. But I'm curious. I asked him if he was in pain. No, he says. Everything is fine. The nose of the machine in his beautiful eyes went out. At the beginning of summer, before we met you, my grandmother invited us to her birthday party. She made a cake and salads. And suddenly Nick said sadly, "I can't go to the service. You go alone." We went to the store together to buy a present. We picked out a beautiful handbag for Grandma. Nick walked me to her house. On impulse, he hugged me, pressed me against him, stroked my hair very gently. It felt like some important words wanted to come out of his mouth, but he didn't say anything. "It's okay," I asked. "Careful. Everything is fine. Go and tell Lyubov Pavlovna." A bow and congratulations from me. "I have to go." He sighed heavily. On duty, Nick kissed me and stood in one place. Until I walked into the yard. It was a birthday party. Grandma's birthday party was very heartwarming. Gathered all her acquaintances. Loyal friends from the plant colleagues came and neighbors' congratulatory speeches, wishes. Then we were left alone, remembered the bright moments of grandmother's life, and just talked about everything. I cleaned my room, washed the dishes. Back in my and Nick's apartment, deep in the night, there was a strange silence on the stairs. The key clicked in the lock. I realized my lover wasn't there. I rushed to the phone, dialed my grandmother's number. Nick had left me. That can't be. Gone, Grandma, left. Gone, and the note. No, only the money on the table in a neat stack. The landlady's this month. How could it be? It was love, like in novels. For a long time, I hoped in things to find an explanation for Nick's departure. The letter, the note, the shuffling, the books, the magazines. I realized it was in vain, but I had hope. I called him at the unit, and they said he quit. I couldn't understand why he'd done it. Everything was going so well. Weeks and months passed. I lived in the dark. I didn't even know where the man I adored was. Was he alive? And then yesterday, on Christmas Eve, after a hard day's work, my colleague Anna called me into the back room. "Follow me, sweetheart. I've got something to talk to you about. I'm looking at you, all gray and transparent. You don't eat, you don't drink. Your face is blank." I recognized him when he came in here, didn't I? "You're Nick." And then I watched from one side. We're his ex-wife. My other classmate went to school in the same village. He's been courting her since she was young. Since high school, you look alike. He got married for the first time in the army. He went AWOL and got a girl pregnant. So he wrote that he had to get married, Nancy. Then he left her. The deceit was revealed that some lady commander wanted pants. Together, they fooled Nick. He went back to his place with his girlfriend. They fell in love again. They lived and broke up. Nancy was pretty. Her beauty made her hot. Sometimes she fell ill with richer men. I found out from the right people. He came back to live with her. When I heard that, I almost fainted from sobbing. Lisa, and leaned against the wall to keep from falling down. Anya, meanwhile, had smothered the cigarette butt. My tender jars rubbed them under their noses for a long time and continued. That one got sick a lot, say here, he decided that he should bring her to the end. You were ashamed to say that, weren't you? I believed her. She always had up-to-date information on all sorts of things. The girl had acquaintances and friendships in the city and beyond. And the lady from poor and rich circles communicated with her. She knew how to listen attentively and was generous with the truth. And Nick has a compassionate nature. That's his style. In the end, she said, don't tear your soul out. You can't get it back. And don't take offense. I don't judge. I would have done the same thing myself. Well, maybe I would. I didn't argue. Thank you. At least that clears it up. Worse than not knowing. And that's why I've given up looking for notes or signs. Now I have to get used to living alone. So I came to you for comfort. My soul still hurts. Oh, Lisa. I held her close to Peter. Why didn't you say something before? My leg was as good as new. I could dance. And you're the one who flew in. Yes, it's hard. I remember the time we spent together on New Year's Eve decorating the tree and dancing under it. I used to bring you branches from it. Remember, I used to put them in a vase and decorate them with candy. You don't have any toys, but I brought you some of the ones I picked out with Nick. I can't bear to look at them. I'm afraid my heartstrings are breaking. Here's a silver glitter ball. Here's a goldfish. Here's a house covered in snow. The angel's gone. He bought it last year and gave it to me as a present. Look how much it looks like you. Do you find it? I was surprised at the time. I'm no angel. No, it's about looks, he continued. Look, green eyes, like your dark curls. But there's still no portrait resemblance. Objected I, but fantasized you imagined our resemblance. Of course I did. I just see it that way. I see a lot of you in nature and in things. Stubbornly stood my ground. So he took a souvenir of him looking like me. What do you think? Lissa asked Peter. Most likely as a memento. He wanted to keep our moments in his head so he could feel a piece of me in another life. That's nice. May the angels of heaven help him. Thank fate for such a bright feeling. It was beautiful. Good girl Lisa, who's so wise and wicked. Her own. Come on, Peter, let's go to my place for Christmas. I'll introduce you to Grandma. It's more fun together, you'll go. I will. Why shouldn't I accept such an offer? Peter was driving with Lisa on the same highway he cleaned yesterday. Oh well, it would be good for him to visit and useful. Anything's better than alone. Oh God, Peter. Wendy Zhenya shook her hands when she saw an old acquaintance on her doorstep on Christmas Day. It seems that the Creator has brought us together again in life. Do you two know each other? Lissa was surprised. So you know him even though you can't remember this meeting. This man helped us to be together. Granddaughter will tell her. Yes, wondered the man, scratching his head. So this is what grew out of that. He threw meaningfully and glanced at the girl. At the table, they discussed the vicissitudes of life for a long time. Everyone thought it was amazing what had happened in the past. But the main thing was that God had sent Lisa with her gift to the sick Peter. Everyone regarded it as a reward for his noble deed in the past and his help to Oli. Every species resembled a young woman, sighed at the same time, and thought about their own. They were roused from their stupor by the sound of the chimes. Peter champagne, Lissa candlelight. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. As the saying goes, you spend Christmas the way you see it. It worked in Peter's life. He celebrated with women. That's why a news story happened to him, a very personal one. In life, you don't get anything with this love thing. Out of the blue, it showed itself to Peter. He could not think that at his age, with already established habits, he could become a groom. You lived, a man who socialized with a narrow circle of people. He got close to Lisa as a daughter from time to time with her grandmother. Sometimes the foreman would drop by the can for a beer and talk about his women. That's pretty much it. And then Mr. Great Accident, or as people believe, the creator of the universe, intervened, destroyed Peter's usual way of life, and changed the course of his life. It was all because of his passion for fishing. Peter loved to sit with a rod on the river bank at any time of the year. However, it happened in the summer, when walking through the woods was a great pleasure for a man. Green crowns were rustling overhead. Birds were counting and sunbeams were playing in the waves of the local river. Somehow he discovered a place where the lines were running. Fish, it's a rare, tasty, tender place. It was a long way down the river from the village in the middle of nowhere. The edges of these Peter knew, but never fished in this side. And so one of the villagers led him there. It was quiet and beautiful there, though it seemed wild in this place that you are alone in the world of nature. And all the tricks of civilization were only brought to life. Not only lines were pressed there, but also mushrooms and berries could be picked. It's a habit. Peter pocket the cunning line's special feed made and threw in the cherished waterhole went. That is, in a remote place for several days. Only then on the dark, still on the slide, began to catch. In the beginning only Karas went, and even after a week on the hand was easy. Yellow-green and finely scaled shimmering green. And then on Peter pecked larger fish stuck to any new place. Unknown to him lady is not rural, who did not know where from. Her, you see, she liked to swim here in a deserted place. All the water the lady was confused and the fish. She died once. In the morning, the man managed to fish out a couple of 3 blades, and then she was already spinning not far away, sharply bolt them into the water from the waves that she created. The lilies swayed and swam. Ah, you abyss, cussed Peter. Fool, shouted. Don't you have a place on the river? You found a place to swim. And she just squinted and splashed in the water 3 meters away from the dots. He was yelling, cursing. But it's not weak with a woman. All to no avail. Into the bushes. No, look for the whistles. The forest is big waving hotly. To hell with her. I went into the river myself with my head, all alone fish swimming, all frightened. And the sun was coming down, and quickly lost the river. The beak stopped, all the fish hid at depth, or on the other bank of the nest, where pines and spruces lined up in an impassable wall. But still the man was angry. A dashing lady, she's attached to him. How not afraid to climb more often made him angry, and she was getting away from a serious conversation. She was running. One of our days, a woman came to his fishing spot. It was an afternoon. Peter bathed and took a shot before dinner, waiting for the evening to end. He lay on the grass sunbathing. It was a hot summer that year. He hears splashes. Aha, the lady went into the water. He came closer. And when she came out of the water, his throat was dry from what he saw. The swimmer was all naked, like the day she was born. Well, completely naked in the clear afternoon sun illuminated her entire body large. But, in amazement, he stared at her, unable to look away. And she's shamelessly straight to him, looking at his face and only smiling. Her hair is wet, bright red, she pushes it back, and the light of the sun penetrates through it. And her lips are half open, juicy scarlet, and her eyes are laughing. Light brown with a yellow cast, a body like this waiting for a man's hands and caresses. She was well built, despite her fullness, like a pussycat. Everything about her was just right. Oh, it's not far to sin, Peter thought at the time. Go away. Vision and boredom. The redhead, as if heard his thoughts, so in the nude and passed by. Into the forest headed, only everyone was looking back, and her eyes were laughing. Walking a step, Eva teased. Around her butterflies fly, grasshoppers jump. She looks at the man over her shoulder with slyness and keeps silent. A coquette. After that, the woman did not appear on the far bank. And Peter realized that she had caught his eye. He was grieving. One day he had a drink with his neighbors and went back to his house. Suddenly in the dark he bumped into someone and felt it. And she was a red-headed mermaid. He recognized her breath, felt her touch, her loose hair, and that was it. From that moment on, they were so in love, just like in the books. So he fell in love with the stranger and asked her to marry him. He found out later that her name was Nancy. The woman came to visit her relatives, a native Muscovite herself, only in the capital. Now the lady rarely traveled, but settled near her husband. She was 10 years younger than her wife. At first she sat at home watching her husband through the window when he'd come back from the fields, and then she took a job as a paramedic. Education allowed. Helen and the foreman left the village. He'd been floundering between his women for 20 years and finally made up his mind. And so that the people of the village wouldn't poke them in the eye and judge them in vain. They went to the east in the taiga. Peter was happy. Now a real loving wife. He had children, but he didn't manage to give birth. But his son from the first marriage visited Nancy, and Lissa didn't forget him. And they were welcoming and loving. Sometimes in a thunderstorm, Peter would jump up in the marital bed. In the middle of the night, she threatened him that he saw a girl with a baby dancing by the roadside. Nadia then stroked his unruly gray hair, laid the man to the lush chest, and he forgot in sweet with not until dawn. The man was lucky to marry Lisa and Lisa to become a planted father, to become and her children as grandchildren to nurse. Long her personal happiness sought, but love came into the life of a young woman. The standards of upbringing that the three elderly ladies gave her were strikingly different from those of today. It was hard to find a couple. Her good-naturedness, openness, naivety were taken for weakness. Often gullibility beauty used people. Her image, as if from classical literature, beckoned its appeal, but also required an understanding of the work of the heart and mind. Relationships with such a girl could not be easy, so approach her could not everyone. Meet more decent ones. There are such too believe and do not think that she is a dog. The close ones have a developed sense of self. She just won't get involved with the shallow ones. Yes, Wendy, loyal friends. I'm not going to argue. I hope God will help us, the woman replied. Only Lissa, after her fiasco with Nick, was in no hurry to get involved with men. She explained it to her elderly ladies by saying that she was busy with business and simply had no time, but then sincerely confessed to her grandmother that she had not found a man who would be to her heart, and so she doesn't want to be with someone else. But no sooner had the women burned out about it. How did they realize the girl had someone? Wendy knew a change was coming. As soon as she saw her granddaughter in her favorite outfit in front of the mirror, Lisa was gorgeous in it. The white new dress with the floral print really suited her. It cost her white textile booties. Here the young woman did not yield to her grandmother, who persuaded her to change them for classic shoes with a heel. In clothes, she preferred comfort. All bye-bye native, laughed Lisa, leaving the house. Her grandmother watched her through the open window inhaling the sociable scent of white tortoise shell. A date in the spring. What could be better than that? Good luck to you, my favorite. Such thoughts ran through his wife's mind. Lisa was always late, so she arrived at the place later than the appointed time. But the young man met her with a smile and a bouquet of roses. She boldly stepped towards him, dazzled by his admiration. And these are flowers for you. A movie or a walk? Not a movie. I do not like long then promenade. Invited the guy. I won't say no. Lisa agreed. They held hands and could not talk to each other until the evening. James was interested in everything related to the past and present. The girl, he caught every word of her story, and she admired his tact, the ability to carry subtle self-irony and external data. Tall of stature with a figure of dark hair and green eyes. His movements were characterized by clarity, and not hurried, but speech with precision and inspiration. He is a young, middle-aged businessman. Smart, persistent, but unobtrusively wealthy, but not boastful of his wealth, open, good-natured, and in love. Walked into Lisa's store, and from the first minute, he captured her attention and gained her trust. These two were made for each other. Their tastes and interests preferences coincided. Only a week of acquaintance, and it was enough for them to realize one simple truth. They need each other like air. Suddenly, a heavy downpour hit the city, and the couple got drenched. They ran into a cafe, drank Serbian brandy with coffee, and said James, without thinking, made his favorite proposal. Beautiful and unconventional. She found the engagement ring in a small box near the pastries he had sent her and her grandmother for breakfast. Next to it was a note: "Become mine, and you'll never cry. I can not only make money, I can forge happiness. Anyway, I'm the prince." Lisa kept this note. She showed it to her kids. Daddy's masterpiece. That's what they called it. One day they went to the sea as a family. It was an active family vacation with dolphinarium, them then organs and jet skis. Their sons are now grown up. Sam and Martin are 15 and 10 years old. He, on the other hand, needed his independence. One night, both boys went to the movies. Nearby, but without their parents. James and Lisa didn't waste any time alone with each other. They went for a walk by the sea. The sound of the surf and the sun coming out overhead. Peace. I'm frozen far away from being within sight all the time. What poked Lisa's husband on the cheek? She wasn't surprised. That's what he's all about, James. Next to her, he's always the brave, lovesick boy. Lisa looked at him warmly. She walked to the shore, looked into the distance. There were footsteps behind her. She turned around. The wind played with her hair and it fell on her face. Behind them, she couldn't see who was in front of her. The strong gust had died down. Standing next to her was Nick. Lisa gasped in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Yeah, I'm at work." He was embarrassed, nodding at the rescue machine. "I've been watching you for 3 days from afar." "You're happy, I can tell. I knew even then that you'd be fine. And you weren't wrong," Lisa confirmed it. "How's your wife and kids?" "Yeah, I'm alone. It's a shame, you're a good man." "I'm sorry, it's time." "Yes, I know they're waiting for you. Take it." He clenched his winning fist. In the palm of his hand was the New Year's angel. "It's yours. Thank you. Keep it as a memento. That's what I wanted you to think of me when you looked at it. And forgive me if I am grateful to life for our love. But I don't live in the past." She gently squeezed the man's firm fingers with her hand, covering the figurine. "All the best." Lisa stepped around the man and walked confidently towards the waterfront. There on the bridge stood James. He waved at her. Lightly, he ran up the steps. She moved closer to her husband, hugged and kissed him. He wrapped his arms gently around her waist, holding a bouquet of roses and 2 popsicles of setting sun. Illuminated their silhouettes, casting long shadows on the wide sidewalk.
Subscribe and click the bell. It happens, it happens. Camille thought, staring at the TV screen. She'd been a pharmacist for about a year and noticed that she could now view both the frightening news and the wall in her office with equal indifference, or the pastries behind the counter at the business center cafe. It's not to say that the zest for life has gone away. It must have gotten a little bland. Camille watched trains crash from airplanes without interest. No admiration or anticipation. Tastes like the lowly ruins she used to love to indulge in on Friday. As if at the end of a workday or on a Wednesday to give herself a little dope. A little prohibition, she joked with her office friends. And the joke was a success with them. Dose forbidden, called small pleasures that allow as if to slip away from the workday, and completely unnoticed by others. So, for example, a delicious and sweet brownie with meringue chocolate touches gorgeous nutty references. Chef Wendy, who worked at Café Delicious, the owner, made the interior in style with accents on anime cartoons and occasionally added recipes from those cartoons. He regularly experimented with dessert and knew Camille as well as her tastes. So sometimes he would try to make some special Earl's Ruin that they could talk about a bit behind the counter when he looked out of the kitchen. And Camille would be waiting for her coffee, or when they crossed paths on the way to the parking lot from the office building. They'd joke about the new flavor, about dessert, about which Count's castle had now fallen apart. It gave a burst of calories and a serving of endorphins. In general, after a tasty, and that still as if honey with different additives dessert, and still drink good coffee. The middle of the day ISO dull drudgery turned into the good news that more than half of the work is done. A nice evening out with girlfriends or with your spouse ahead. Cereal check or a book. A bunch of funny thoughts popped into my head. The dreary guys in the office were now not energized by NY, but looked funny. This secret way of escape helped to find freedom in the conditions of corporate everyday life from a working bee, which swarms in its honeycomb, extracting unknown honey, unknown to whom to turn into a proud Orly, which looks with a little snobbery and disdain from its height at the bustle of days. Camille and the unfaithful office girlfriends had a whole arsenal of such forbidden. One of them carried candy in her purse. Finland. Sure, some might say it's about working alcoholism, but the difference between the locksmith who bangs on a glass before work and at lunch and Camille and her girlfriends was clear and noticeable. That said, the point of prohibition was to use these methods fairly infrequently. The candy could lie in the bag. Emily for weeks. And only occasionally she have a boring meeting. She would shove her girlfriends to the side. At large meetings, when in a large conference hall, similar to a lecture hall, gathered all departments or mentally pushed to the side of herself, when the boss gathered in a more chamber-like atmosphere only their department and realized its time candy was taken out and handed out of the bag. The chocolate shell was dispensed from hidden behind a sugar on caramel layer of a couple grams of fiery water, flowing over the surface of the tongue of intoxication. Such candies, of course, did not provide any more feeling or flavor. Nevertheless, they always worked for sure. Boring stories and presentations became much more engaging, the lighting more pleasant, and the words of others ceased to give off such a harshness of sharpness. There was now no sharpness in the perception found. The problem was that there wasn't much to it at all. Her friends at work didn't notice the change, mistaking the found apoliticalness for calmness. They thought their specialist Camille worked as one of the deputies in the human resources department of a large logistics company, had learned some special zen. She is, after all, the psychologist that Rick read at the Institute, and still sometimes goes to all kinds of whales. The friends sometimes listened with pleasure on Odin esoteric stories and reasoning, but more for the sake of entertainment and a sense of exoticism. They also treated her to psychological advice, which she gave unobtrusively, but quite accurately well-versed in the peculiarities of each of her friends. However, neither Evelyn was Emily, nor the more age-appropriate. Veronika Platonovna did not particularly listen to this advice. After all, where is it? Psychology and life. Here, too, everything is clear without any psychology. Sebastian, her spouse, didn't notice the change either. In style, he did not feel her particularly well, and outwardly they remained passionate and active in their communication. Sebastian tried to be sweet and caring, but for the most part, he played the role as if he were always standing on stage in front of an audience that was carefully observing and evaluating his playing the good and caring spouse. So Sebastian, whom Camille in her esoteric way called chance, was a word associated with peace, and at the beginning of the relationship he could really give some kind of marvelous peace, more concerned with playing well and being more contented with the audience than with Camille herself. Of course, it became more noticeable that she was more silent or more often wanted to stay at home than to go to a concert or for a walk. But Sebastian thought they were becoming more serious and in some ways boring neighbors. But such is the natural course of things, and the audience watching them play the role of a good family not only doesn't accept such boredom, but thinks it's important for good families to be moderately boring, quiet. In addition to the girls from work, Camille had two friends. Camille considered the two of them at once and did not particularly distinguish between them. But others still thought that the huge tunnel bass and the institute girlfriend Wendy should not be equaled. Camille was of a different opinion and thought that a dog was also a human being. At least her Jenna certainly was. The two of them often made themselves comfortable in a large leather and eerily expensive and rumpled chair that the boss had allowed her to pick up during another office redesign. The chair used to stand in the CEO's small reception area. Only very important assholes sat in it. Therefore, Camille thought that it was definitely not worth squeamishness and should be taken near. Moreover, maybe the aura of wealth and wealthiness would add to the prosperity of their house with Sebastian. The salary really increased after that. Camille also had a couple of students whom she sometimes helped by tutoring. But was it the result of aura, wealth, or the planned indexing of salaries and Yandex advertising? Camille left the questions unanswered. After all, how could one know? Maybe the decision to moonlight as a tutor had come after sitting in the chair, but would have continued to sit on the couch with Sebastian. At most, she'd have thought of a new card with a check on it. Anyway, Camille and Jenna would often sit on that immense, giant-looking chair and stare out the TV or window. Nellie would lay Camille's head on her chest, and Milo would sing. Sometimes they would stare into each other's eyes for a long time. Camille would shift her gaze to the sky outside the window and catch the feeling of ultimate serenity. It also seemed that Jenna understood her well without words, and their conversation was at least as good as the pleasant chit-chat with Wendy's friends. And irregularly they even sat, probably lingering on Wendy in the narrow kitchen and drinking strong coffee, heavy and thoughtful conversation discussing the news and long philosophical musings. Wendy, unlike her found girlfriends at work, understood psychology, and out of the five she not only could keep the conversation on topic, but had something to say. Here's the thing. It may seem vulgar and primitive to you, of course. Wendy ran her fingers over her crumpet and a detached gaze contemplated the branching trees outside the window of her crusty apartment building. There is androgen, and the idea of a whole person of both sexes sort of is. As if there is, nodded the person sitting across from you, Camille, enjoying the inspiring rush of your coffee enthusiasm, inhaling the coffee and anticipating another deliciously funny conversation with her friend. In the communication of the sexes, which is also called at us decent young ladies intimate, harmony is kind of restored, and we create a goddess, that is, a perfect being. Right. Pistil mysticism, stamens, bolts, and nuts, an elaborate harmony. I understand your irony. Wendy gave her friend a brief glance with a smile. But in essence, it's bolts and nuts. So right off the bat, she sort of said what might seem vulgar. Kind of go on, as if to heed your speeches with all seriousness. Before the section, Camille amusingly raised a cup with 2 fingers and portrayed a concentrated look. Then the attention about taking out, Wendy leisurely and majestically put her palm down on the table and said in such a solemn tone that both of them could hardly restrain themselves from laughing. However, they loved to bring each other humor to exalted moods, the joy of laughter, but at the same time to hold back and as long as possible do not go into a prolonged laughter. Okay, here's the scheme. Is such a scheme from sipped more coffee. Wendy slightly moved the cup to gesture more comfortably over the table. There are 7 basic checker. There definitely are, but there's also like a physical body. A case of saying little beyond that. Don't be shy, Camille said. But the bodies are different for aunts and uncles. And what do we see? Asked Wenduja. We see a table, but is it really there? Apparently, the Baltic screws, or rather, nuts, in general, convexly these. Now, this is all a joke to you, of course, but look closely. There's the yang, the hara, the lower chakra. What do we know that's convex? There's finally some understanding. That's right. And underneath, our bodies are convex and bulging. They both laughed and paused for a few minutes to catch their breath and to sip the sweet and strong coffee that sent shivers down the back of their necks. Wendy continued with, this is what a hammer is. Chakra. That's right. The main chakra that conducts like energy, vitality, the most basic and gross, survival itself. And who are the most defiant? Rats, cockroaches. No, men. That's a bit controversial. How about Africans or homeless people? Camille asked. The toughest living men, that's why they have a bulge. And we're right. What's higher? If you're talking about genitalia. Well, let's take the breasts theme even further. You won't be bored. It's a real pleasure and a bit of a thrill, said Camille. Now on the subject of arousal, Wendy continued. Who are the sexiest, kind of attractive and passionate girls? That's right. And that's why if you look at the part that decent young ladies can only call babes in the kitchen and in the company of a friend, you'll see that with us young ladies it's kind of bulging. It's anatomy. But in men it's at least flat. Why is that? Maybe it's an anatomy thing. Of course it is, but at the energetic level, at the level of subtle anatomy, we have this center more developed. So we are so passionate and creative. And men, well, how would you see a sexy male striptease or a dance in general? Jim Carrey and Masons know, but it's certainly Trump. Heh. But seriously, okay, let's go higher. Like higher, more and everywhere, we see this kind of connection. My stomach's got to go. The will, the activity to push something through, to save, to gather, to build. Yes, women have a belly, but it is not from the belly. It's the previous chakras of the Saint of Houston. It's the mani. The abdominal muscles and stuff are more developed in men, especially since you've noticed that bosses are more likely to be chubby guys, and a lot of people are attracted to that. Not me and not me, but I'm kind of attracted to one client. She told me about her fetish, by the way. Wendy used to give psychological trainings on the internet, and by the way, she has a thing for bossy, strong-willed men. You know, the kind of, domestic comfort and stability. I'm just now realizing that. But as they say, it all adds up. Sherlock, your method never fails. You've unlocked the mystery of being through the convex stuff of a cavity. And to expand the matter seriously, said Wendy, listening to you with the utmost seriousness, replied Camille. So, moving higher and see that everything is correct, as they say in decent society. Flipboards. Obama, but here about the exchange you kind of accurately said. Basically, the breasts are at the level of Shihut. That's why we're so loving. We kind of have it right out there. I'm so drunk on coffee, it's kind of sticking out. Camille. Wendy looked Camille in the eye and put her hand on her palm. Camille tried to tease Wendy at the look with her own, as if even deeper and matter-of-factly loving, and both laughed. But men also have a kind of like. Camille kept nodding along to the chi-chi, like I'm talking about the natural order. And in that order, we have it, and they don't. Why? Because we're more developed, and we're so tender and loving. And men are kind of boo-boos, not emotional in general, without tenderness. And we're carriers. Carriers, yeah, carriers of breasts. And under these breasts, we give love on an energetic level. But we signed for what? For iPhones. It's kind of funny. It's actually for the next chakra. Because the jokes were what? That's right, the Adam's apple. So the energy from us below goes above. And now men give us from the grid. That is such a subtle creation of feeling. You've noticed that all sorts of creative guys love big scarves and things like that. Camille nodded. That's kind of a sign of the elaborate joke they're covering up and spreading. Basically, what you're saying is that there's an exchange of energies from the bottom. We give to the men, we give to the top, and so on. For example, did they protect us from predators or bring meat to the cave? We give the men sexuality at the level of the fight, the camp. They enjoy it and feed off of it. We are not the couple at whose expense the house is built, and status creates our comfort. We fill the house, sweat and love give tenderness at the expense. And at the hut they transform that love into high creative ideas and give them jokes. Camille, give me the credit. Do you want more coffee? No, let's go for a walk to my place. And we'll walk with Jenna too. Only I have a professor for you. Dear Wendy, one more question. Where's the upper chakra? Okay, but not on the way. Then we'll go to Rainbow Smile. I need to see something there. Regarding your question, Wendy matter-of-factly corrected her large glasses without Desperas, which she bought because it's sexy and also ironic, and looked at Camille sideways. You make all the right points. There is a third eye, or as we real Hindus say, that's good. Above it, 1,000 lotus petals blossom on the top of the head. You want to know if there's a trade. I want to go to the bathroom more. I'm gonna run. You talk. I can hear everything. Camille got up and went to the restroom next to the kitchen. Well, my Lakshka, I will reveal to you the truth that there is no exchange on these. There are only higher realms and independent progress. Then what's the point? Speak. I hear you. Camille went to wash her hands. The point is that you create a harmonious unity and then rise with knowledge as if by yourself to the higher worlds. No, my shampoo is new. Wendy shouted the shampoo phrase louder. Camille came to the kitchen with a bottle in her hands and, sitting down, began to read the composition of the same. Honey did not see the most important thing. Well, Camille abruptly broke away from reading and walked over to her friend. Funny. Insistent stare. No need to get so worked up. Wendy adjusted her glasses again. Everything has its turn. You haven't considered or asked, of course, what happens when you lack energy on some level. It's known to be debauchery and drugs. Well, you're right. Wendy's tired of playing the professor. All sorts of deviance and disharmony sets in. Anyway, to make a long story short, let's go pack. If one level is lacking, the next level is also bad. For example, if a man hasn't built a house or achieved anything, the girlfriend doesn't give him love. By the way, the logic is vulgar, but money can really kind of buy the tenderness and love of the manipulator. It is, after all, money, the ability for money to accumulate and own. Sure, it's vulgar sounding, but it's essentially an exchange of energies. In general, you mean that in a normal couple everything is harmonious and such a mutual exchange. And if there is not enough of something, then there will be imbalance or balance on the side. Give me the credit. Clearly understood. How's that sound? It makes sense, and you can't argue with anatomy. Oh, and I'm gonna need that anatomy flash drive. Why do you want me to watch it tonight? It's in my living room somewhere right now. What about you and Sebastian? There's no imbalance anywhere. Yeah, it seems fine. She's not running around looking for balance on the side. Walks, long walks. Camille used to go out with Wendy as much as possible in her spare time, but she got bored with it. And Camille wasn't enough. She discussed various sad news stories, which she watched with as much indifference as she talked about them. But Wendy was getting bored with these conversations. It seemed that her friend had become too cynical. Camille, however, was not cynical. Her personality type was not inclined to cynicism at all. It was just the bland taste that bothered her for some reason. Maybe I'm less of a problem, she asked Wendy. Or maybe there's more money, she asked. But that too. That's my soul getting fat in ridiculous comfort. You know, I'm getting good money for tutoring. It's kind of like a kind of income for fun now. I mean, if you look at my previous living conditions, I've never been more comfortable. In a way it is, Wendy replied. If you were my client, I would tell you that we have been fearful creatures for centuries, hundreds of thousands of years, trying to survive in a harsh jungle. And now we can enjoy comfort. Therefore, the search for suffering or adventure is a purely logical process for us that we should not be frightened of. We should curb this urge, turn it into a tool for the realization of tendencies that are useful for us. If you, Wendy, were to give me such nonsense in a session, I would lose faith in people and in the training of professional psychologists. Wendy playfully got into a fighting stance, as if defending her skills. Camille copied her stance. They laughed and walked further down the fall street. The world is starting to turn yellow, Camille said, looking at the crowns that had recently begun to turn yellow in gaps in their emerald temple. You know, I think maybe the devil has forsaken me. More details, please, about Wendy's cheerfully amused tone. And looked at her friend, eyes bulging a little. But you know, a lot of people say that it's a problem to lose religion, or that you'll be left by some kind of God presence. Well, I don't think you have to worry about that. First of all, there is nothing you can do, and if you think logically, what kind of worries can there be about it? The devil is another matter. If he tempts you or hinders you in some way, then you are definitely, well, or with high probability, a good person. But if he left you, why should you be afraid? Everything is clear with you. You don't need to be tempted. That's an interesting thought. Who did you read it from? Yes, I didn't read it myself. I'm thinking about problems, about their absence, about fat comfort, and strange hopelessness. I think maybe that's the problem. Yeah, girlfriend, you're not talking to a psychologist. You're talking to a theologian. Are you suggesting we go to church? They both looked at each other. Okay, I don't want to burden you. I'm gonna go talk to the German girl about soap operas. Maybe intellectual fast food makes your soul fatter, asked Wendy. Maybe the question is whether she can marry at all. The question is whether you remain attractive. The question is beside the point, replied Camille, since Sebastian can't reach me or see me there, as probably no one else can. Okay, bye. Bye, Sebastian. Hi. In the evening, Camille watched the show in the armchair with her, and she spent the week with Sebastian on her free days, so they didn't go out much. Except sometimes, they hung around the house and went to cafes to sit in the company of other people, to show their presence in the world. They often walked to the parking lot together, and usually ate at home before work. Sebastian worked as a contractor in construction, and due to his malleable style had good orders and good income. In this field, a lot depends on government contracts. Everyone is tied to the budget in one way or another. That is why those who work for patriotism are successful. It is necessary to express loyalty to everything from thoughts, bosses, and decisions of large developers to news about new bills and the next successes in the geopolitical arena. At the same time, loyalty should be expressed ahead of time. That is, before it is necessary to formally confirm one's allegiance to the party's course. Sebastian was good at this. Moreover, he understood for himself who he was. In the Soviet era, such a person would have been called a sycophant. But Sebastian was good at this dish called outer loyalty. He really knew how to play the good guy. In a way, being good at everything. And if you didn't really deal with his ideas, you couldn't mess with them. And the country and business always needs a good guy like that. Sebastian was good at his estate, in fact, and it was because of his image that he was able to build a relationship with Camille. He understood Camille's psychology well and understood her instincts and impulses in many ways better than she did herself. He did not want to put things into words or think about them. Sebastian only sensed when to let Camille be frightened and then to calm her down. He knew in front of whom and in what situation to play the cool driver, and when to look at everyone with arrogance and squeamishness, as if external conditions did not concern him at all, and he was above mediocre experiences. Always he framed his reactions and behavior in a way that made him look winning. And this strategy had an effect. Of course, if you take apart all these techniques on paper, try to reflect on who Sebastian is, who he is. If you take apart his movements individually, it's obvious that the guy is a hypocrite at best. Though even so, one could not raise a hand to condemn him, as they say. After all, Sebastian, like so many other people, actually wanted happiness for himself. A little ridiculous, but can we reproach a man who strives for happiness? The problem was that if all these techniques were used consistently, and Sebastian created a story about his person, built an image in front of another person, then these charms were difficult to detect. He looked more than harmonious and cool, so he could charm Camille, who only after a couple of years of life together discovered these details of the game in him, but did not judge and accuse him. She stopped at the fact that he was trying for their relationship after all. Similarly, she treated the new arrival of her spouse during trips to the parking lot. The parking lot they used was about 10 minutes from the house at a new apartment complex. But it was a prestigious parking lot, like in a cool American movie. Sebastian had gotten a couple of spaces on favorable terms through his connections, and he liked to use this parking lot as a status symbol. As they drove through the floors, they saw expensive cars. There were serious, solid people walking around in the building with their serious business. Everyone liked to feel a part of it. He, too, was a respectable man who could afford such a parking lot. On the way, they talked about work, looked at passers-by, and discussed them over the cena. Jigurda kept almost nodding toward the sturdy guy with long hair at the bus stop. Here is a man who has and feels the inner core picked up. And Camille, they smiled and continued to joke about the people they saw. Look, a rental. Didn't look like they took it out. It's a drive-through, though. Sebastian nodded at the windows, having recently closed. U.S. Farms. The sauce is like sour cream. Camille replied. It's kind of an anti-flavor. Yeah, it's a talent to ruin a dish that's almost impossible to ruin. It takes a lot of effort. Camille echoed the same sentiment. It's a good thing they closed. This is what their typical dialogue looked like. Before work, a pleasant chat, meaningfully similar to a song about everything you see. Camille not often, but often said something serious. She would get carried away with her words, and her eyes would sometimes hide. As in the first days of their acquaintance, Sebastian tried to look, and even be brutal and serious, but at the same time as if he were not a tense master of the situation. One morning as they moved leisurely down a warm fall street, Sebastian, behind his vacillating coolness, did not hide not only himself, as a good actor hides himself before the audience, but also his discontent, as he often hides in public. Almost every person who believes that in society you should maintain a general degree of normality and calmness, and not worry the space with your worries. Sebastian was worried about the lack of morning intimacy, which he didn't insist on, but still strived hard enough to get, and in the end, he got from Camille. Only hope for the next time they were together. The thing is, the need was part of his image of a cool life, which unexpected morning intimacy between spouses is something romantic. And Camille saw this option as the same need as the morning toilet, just wrapped in a veneer of fake aesthetics. Camille understood that it was not a matter of intimacy, but of wanting, in fact, to go to the bathroom as well. It had been wanting since the morning. She understood that there was much more physiology to it. so unobtrusively dismissed gradually the claims of a sweet morning. Sebastian knew, however, that he would have a sweet morning anyway. "Let's go take a look." He pointed to a new coffee shop that had been opened where the farm used to be. Nastya immediately understood what was going on and didn't argue. "Of course, let's go. We're a coffee shop. We need to know the nearest points." On the one hand, they really both drank coffee regularly. On the other hand, they drank a cup of coffee in the morning, sometimes in coffee houses, and sometimes they took a strong cup of instant coffee with condensed milk. Before watching movies experientially, they found that the effect allowed them to go deeper into the movie, to relax their bodies almost completely, but still reflect on the picture. Did Camille often have coffee with Wendy, or before the end of her shift at work with her friends? The coffee jolts, however, were clearly an exaggeration. Not to say that they couldn't do without these effects at all, and were somehow addicted to coffee drinks. For Sebastian in general, the cup was more often important, because the cup was a symbol of a cool modern guy who goes about some important business with this cup, and with a sip the cup gave a pleasant feeling. With each sip it made Sebastian feel good. He felt especially good when he managed to show up in front of someone with a cup of coffee. There were a lot of coffee shops on the way to the parking lot. They lived in a dense, built-up part of town, in a large apartment complex, near a lot of transit stops, all kinds of buildings. And Sebastian started stopping in occasionally on his way out for another drink, reasoning that he wasn't awake. Camille knew he wanted to walk coolly to his car in the parking lot with a drink in one hand and a key fob in the other, and that someone important and serious who uses this respectable parking lot would see him like that. It wasn't the first time Camille had made jokes about coffee junkies. Only this time, she knew Sebastian wanted to flirt some more with the young barista they had seen there earlier. She knew that Sebastian wanted to prove to himself that basically he could pick anyone at all and give himself a sweet morning. He could, but he didn't really want to. At least he didn't take a croissant. Camille thought as they approached the parking lot. The thing is, Sebastian saw his ideal image not only walking with a cup of coffee, but also sitting down with a croissant. First of all, Sebastian liked to chew, and it seemed that the world becomes more pleasant when you chew something tasty on the go. Secondly, he thought it made the space more his own and himself more spontaneous. The ridiculous thing was that Sebastian was sort of unobtrusively adjusting to the situation, and he wasn't particularly hungry. He did, however, enjoy taking the croissant course past the security guard's booth in the parking lot. To see another customer stepping out of the elevator and nod a little taking a bite of his bun. Camille had long understood these movements of his inner world and outer behavior, but believed that if one wanted to make a man feel comfortable, why forbid it if it is happiness for him? She thought, why reshape it? It would be ridiculous to arrange a clarification of relations on this topic. The family budget allowed to go to the cafe in the morning, and in general everyone liked it. Should we be worried? Especially Sebastian himself could hardly admit to his little fetish. Probably for him, such a thing would be a serious problem as for an actor who was exposed on stage and now awaits some frightening unknown. Sebastian-like, eating my croissant in public and feeling cool. It was a thought Camille had come to terms with, though sometimes thinking about it and watching him, if not frightening, seemed to expose some strange thoughts. When Sebastian bit into his croissant at the perfect moment, for example, after a serious phrase he had said on the phone, and when he was noticed by another person, and Sebastian looked solid and businesslike, but at the same time as if he were his own guy with a bun. He looked, if he didn't bite the gentleman by the beard, he was definitely tugging at some sensitive part of the world that might be giving the average man some tasty and useful juice. Probably the teat of some peaceful world cow that nourishes all living things. But if one pressed a little on the bite, then with the milk would flow the blood of that cow. And it seemed that Sebastian, with such prizes in front of the invisible, but more real, at least for him, than the visible reality of the auditorium. After all, it was not only the oncoming person who looked at him, But the world in general wants to achieve just that. Over Kosovo does not want to commune with this blood because he thinks that something true and something at least happy is hiding from him, hiding somewhere in other people's lives, in beautiful movies. But if he will persistently gnaw into this world, trying not to show outwardly, so that he could not be denounced in these gnawing and trotting, he will achieve that happiness with him, that the audience will stop watching so closely and will begin to admire, if not every, then most of the movements of his life, words, and a beautiful, honest look that looks into the world, as if Ryan Gosling from the screen, when Camille these reprisals too frightening or tiring. She could cut a situation short with a mocking phrase or a look. Of course, she tried to do such things gently and didn't mean to hurt feelings at all. She rationed this exposure so that she could only destroy that strange aura of movie happiness and bring him back to reality. Reality he didn't like. At least the kind where he couldn't help but compulsively bite off similar bits and pieces of bread. For from the fancy glass, he understood what Camille was doing, but he could not admit it even to himself. For if he confessed, the meaning of his emerging urges would be revealed. He would be uncovered and discovered beneath the slenderness of all seemingly such natural behavior. His soft smoked with cheese on the butter of life will turn into a harsh, unpredictable, and rough reality, even if he already every day rubs on our Doug and only managed to convince himself about the butter and cheese, so to speak, to merge his own mind in this illusion wanted to believe and did not want to destroy. That's why every attempt on his strictly planned and in some way even long-suffered fairy tale of his happiness by Camille was remembered and postponed as an unexpected deception and danger. Let Camille in reality restrain him from deception, above all from deceiving himself. But he didn't like it and wanted to play it cool and eat a croissant and coffee on the way to work to look cool. Sebastian generally tried to live his life to look perfect, and his logic was that if you always look cool, you will be or already are cool. If you behave like a happy person, you look happy. That is, you'll be happy in the end. Sebastian didn't want to be happy, so he was always afraid of being late for happiness, late for life. This peculiarity of his manifested itself in many ways. He chose a fashionable hobby, which someone began to be interested in, tried to bypass or overtake his acquaintances in something even in small things like this manifested itself. For example, when he saw one of the guys in the parking lot in the morning, one of the guys they had glimpsed in the company office, when they saw each other in a coffee shop nearby or on the road when they arrived in the evening after work, Sebastian always wanted to pull out of the parking lot first. He and Camille usually walked leisurely in the mornings, but if one of the guys you knew showed up, he would naturally but insistently and actively speed up to get to the car and start as fast as he could. Although on other days he could first walk Camille to her compact sedan to look at the car, a little chat, wish her a good day, and only then go to her car. It was similar in the manner of communication, in the choice of opinions, behavior, hobbies. Sebastian aspired to the place where he thought it was possible to look happy and feel happiness, which, by the way, was illustrated by a famous proverb. But Sebastian believed that, in the end, it should still become good where he is, and sometimes really captured moments of inner harmony and very sublime feeling when he thought that everything in this world, in this life he has cool, and he himself can be an example of a good and happy man. As we know, every man strives for happiness. Wendy did her professional wise owl look, although Camille, having watched a couple of recordings of her online trainings, called this characteristic technique cheap hypnosis and slowed down the speech literally for a second, so that the client caught up not only the meaning of the words, but also emotionally energetic message. The current Dalai Lama states that, in a sense, all living beings strive for happiness, and that is the natural process. You see, we cannot deny that human beings want to not suffer. Moreover, our inner suffering can be much more significant and sensitive than our outer suffering. That's why you make an appointment with me. Sit down in front of a laptop screen to talk about your problems. Talk it through. as a way to get out of your misery, to understand the cause and eliminate them if you want. Perhaps consider them in a different way. We psychologists are modern-day shamans, that is, soul healing specialists, and you are ordinary people. Come to us to talk the problem out. Vanessa, if you find it therapeutic, use this kind of magical interpretation. Consider our sessions as conspiring problems. You know how the witches in the villages could heal all kinds of pain. Wendy realized that a large mug of coffee had to be brewed. Talking this time was more involved than usual. In most sessions, she gave a set of 3 true questions, and the patient client would talk at length about herself, and she would listen and sometimes throw directly to the camera. A thoughtful and sharp look, creating a very effective illusion of understanding and presence. Once, for fun, she even discreetly played Kennedy in a session. But to do such a thing again was not allowed. The categorical imperative and moral law within her. And the sweet Irish coffee, parting glanced up at her from the bottom of the cup, waiting for the last sip. Not easy both sips, thought Wendy, and began to remember a recent Scandinavian movie about how people lack always a small portion of alcohol in the blood. And if this level is maintained, it is possible to achieve a feeling of permanent happiness, at least on a hormonal level. Clearly, the heroes of the movie. School teachers first sang on the idea of testing the thesis, and then got drunk. And some of them even got fired. But who can fire her? And she sits in her underwear with legs, in a basin of warm water to think better, but at the same time not to strain, speaks, and for every word she says, she gets good money. At the same time, she is paid not so much for her words as for the time she fills with those words. That is, timing is important. In the art of stretching it, Wendy would be the envy of Dumas himself, who was paid by the lines, and so he loved to spell out dialogues with phrases of a couple of words. Long dialogues, which probably pleased many school children that the pages of such books are read much faster. And you don't have to think about the dialogues. Wendy once thought about it and noticed that a lot depends on the content. After all, somewhere in a century wrote Hemingway, and also often used dialogue in places phrases, but he had many meanings buried under each word, which were revealed in a motley kaleidoscope. It was worth only the reader to look into these words under the phrases of Dumas were buried under the coins that he received for each line, and probably his own vanity of yet another smart guy who had managed, as they say, to screw the system. Wendy considered himself a faithful continuer of the Telesystem's traditions, and in some ways even saw his own person as a part of the privileged community, if not the chosen one. Wendy used quite legitimate therapeutic techniques, which corresponded to the methods of her work. Repeating the question once, asking her to describe feelings, and analyzing emotions. Nevertheless, in fact, a substantial part of the session may have consisted, for example, of a dream question. Do you think so? And a detailed response from the client, and a follow-up question. Now, do you really think so? To which Wendy would of course add a meaningful look. And if she realized that the client, as they say, does not particularly understand, could in combination with a look to take the soul of glasses and slightly shift them down, making as if a smart teacher's look from behind. Essentially, real and honed. Wendy's professional skills consisted of being able to pinpoint exactly who she was with. Such a technique was possible to use. And for whom should it be used? Only a deep and thoughtful gaze, which was required while being really diligent in filling it with emotion, sincerity, and empathy. Analyzing emotions was one of the respected methods for Wendy, being not only a woman, but also a very popular and experienced commercial psychologist, knew that women were happy, indeed, especially in confidence, to talk about their own feelings. Not all of them, but of her clients and in general of those who use the services of psychologists, almost all of them. So there was always an opportunity to turn the session into a mixture of therapeutic meditation combined with the use of psychotherapeutic techniques. Wendy would set clear tasks, for example, to talk about the colors of the emotions the client was experiencing. After that, she could tell a little esoteric detail about thought forms and the presence of each thought-emotion bundle. Real appearance, which could be fixed by people if it were not for the limitations of their perception. After that, it was possible to ask a lot of repeated questions about emotions, work through feelings colored in different colors, and much more. The point was that clients liked this kind of thing and were eager to engage in stories about the color of their own feelings and the variety of experiences. That said, the clients, unlike Wendy, were generally unaware that the more one talked about feelings, the more words and details would appear in addition to her professional inventory. It stretches the timing, and as if not quite legal, but generally acceptable and quite useful successors. Try saying each word leisurely. Feel your speech and feel what you fill those words with. Long and meaningful stares into the camera. Concentrate on the breath of silent meditation. Of course, Wendy would not allow herself to suggest silent meditation for the entire session. But if it got tiring and she didn't know how to end it, she doubted it would have a good effect. At the end of the session, she offered to meditate on what had been said and portrayed full inclusion in the process. Outwardly, this inclusion was expressed by sitting with closed eyes and wrinkled eyebrows in front of the camera. Although she had acquaintances who were already putting together online meditation groups and practicing for at least an hour at a time, collecting a good income, some objected that scolding such gatherings was not the point, and the point is to be present and silently concentrate. To which Wendy logically parried that such practices are also available in elevators, public transport, queues, and traffic jams. And unbeknownst to her, perhaps the company of much more conscious citizens will be nearby, and the effect of silent concentration, accordingly, should be of higher quality. The quality of life is largely determined by the quality of one's inner state. Wendy stopped remembering the Scandinavian movie and sad about not yet up to coffee. What do you need 1 million for expensive sneakers if you have no feet? But what are your feet for? If you don't want to run, you don't know where to go. If you're confused, what do you use the tastier food for? If you are annoyed about nothing, will you enjoy the attention of a beau? If you are rubbing ridiculous reproaches out of yourself, Wendy knew there were still about 10 minutes left. During her sessions, she purposely didn't look at the time so that she could be fully engaged in the integrity of the process and not be distracted, and set a timer to report back. But the problem, Vanessa, a sales rep from Ugra, was not presenting a problem. How to solve it? At the same time, Vanessa was a valued customer from all sides, a wealthy and status provincial who was good at her job. But from the field of psychology, she knew only the TV series Deceive Me, which she did not watch, preferring popular comedies or series about brave special forces or something similar. Clearly, you want to choose one of your girlfriends. First of all, there is an internal conflict. In addition, you must competently use their resources emotional. There's a lot of meaningful looks here too. And realize that you have one life, one you, and you want to be happy. Which, as we have found out through many examples, is well worth striving for. Which is quite normal, you know. Wendy, you make a good point, but it's the very question of that choice that concerns me. You're right to speak for me. No one can make me happy or do the inner work. A woman with a fake tan, a large face and large parts on it with the look of a trusting sheepdog, and an expensive necklace looked at Wendy from the screen. But it's hard to choose, isn't it? We've been friends for so long. And you say we have to decide. No, Vanessa, look, you're the one talking. And you know, you and I are just actualizing your intentions in words. I mean, we're expressing in speech what you have, but you're not saying. You yourself know that you should choose one of your friends for further communication and cut down on communication with the other one. Only in this way you will be able to build your career normally and be, as they call it, in the resource. Wendy, I remember you said that in order to build something, you need to destroy something. But is it worth destroying a relationship like this? It seems a bit far-fetched to me right now. Vanessa, I had a similar situation. In general, There shouldn't be such frankness between us. But I'll tell you in a friendly way. Wendy did not want to strain herself and thought of a way to end the session smoothly. I also had two friends, Nancy Vysotskaya and Evelyn. They and I were in psychology school when we had to write our thesis. I was able to make good points with each of them. But Nancy was not the best influence on the zone of my immediate development as a scholar and professional. Evelyn, when she once had a seizure right in our faculty lab, told me to take the necessary measurements. I was writing a paper on psychophysiological traits at the time, and I had to go to hospitals to take these measurements for my thesis. What was difficult? Evelyn thought first of all not about herself, but about me. And then, by the way, when I visited her, she herself offered to make the measurements I needed, which was much more convenient than recruiting an experimental base with unknown people. And in the hospital, she got to know the other wards. Only for what? Right, so she could take measurements when I visited her. Who do you think I kept in touch with after my master's program? Probably Evelyn. Vanessa responded to Wendy's expressive stare by staring at her from the screen. Right? The question was rhetorical. Wendy continued enthusiastically, as she knew the timer was close. I've been in touch with Evelyn further, and we have a good experience with each other. Enriching each other, exchanging energies. You have a similar situation, and you know the criteria of choice, and you can quite easily make an analogy from my story and draw conclusions about your inner contradictions about it. Let us look at the ideas of inner integrity that we see in the so-called Jungian notebooks. You've probably heard of him. I've heard of him, but I haven't read him. I just know Carl Jung, answered Vanessa. A pleasant melody from a mixture of gongs and Tibetan bowls sounded. Then you'll know. I offer you a convenient and productive elective. I will record you a short lecture on the South. In the context of your problem, your task is to listen at your leisure and analyze your own methods about what you hear. We can move the new session a bit if you need more time, or we can call as always and discuss it, given that I will record the lecture especially for you, and I will have to work through the material additionally. The lecture will go as the cost of 2 sessions, but I strongly advise you. Of course, Wendy, I remember it's a psychological mechanism, and when we pay a lot, we value the product more. I remember, Wendy. Vanessa smiled and nodded. Okay, well, I don't feel comfortable distracting you from other things. I'll have the fee for the lecture and the next session in an hour. Thank you, Wendy. You should remember that the best gratitude for me is your peace of mind, development, and prosperity. So think about yourself, analyze, use our work. Bye for now. Connections then, Vanessa. If you need anything, you can always come to me. I'll be in touch. For now, Wendy smiled and waved her hand in front of the screen, then abruptly brought that hand down on the spacebar that disconnected the call. She picked up the cup with the remaining coffee with the palm of her hand and finished the rest of it with relish. She looked up at the bookshelf behind the computer screen, from where Vygotsky's spines looked back at her, and raised the cup again, nodding at the books and as if drinking to them, sweetly lingering and about the gray in her head with the pads of her fingers. Wendy realized she wanted to make herself a cocktail and call Camille into the kitchen. She picked up a thick-bottomed glass. She thought about the fact that if the bottom was thick enough, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to break through. Grinned at that thought, and half full a bottle of Black Label from where she poured some into the glass. Took a sweet syrup from the shelf. Picked the yellowest lemon in the fridge and squeezed some into the glass. Greased off a cut slice of it around the rim. Wendy knew how to make different cocktails, but they rarely drank with Camille because the two of them were already having fun together. Wendy wasn't much fun on her own, and her ability to make delicious cocktails helped her to ignore this very obvious reality. The lemon version of the cocktail was almost ready. She added some ice and Essentuki on top, and once again realized that someday God would not protect her, and she would still be tempted to start a social network account, where she would start posting her variations of famous cocktails with her own author's recipes, as well as selfies of walks in combination with clever captions. words and liquids. She was good at getting in the way of telling it. Internet space got in the way of socializing with Camille, who had a snobbish attitude toward almost everyone who hosts social media. The only exceptions for her were business accounts and the pages of any publicists. Wendy wanted to keep a level head and didn't give in to the urge to pour her skills of pouring tasty concoctions into her tummies and other minds on the internet. She sat comfortably in her computer chair and dialed Camille over the video link. From the thick-bottomed glass loaves, she had prepared one of the standard bonjour greetings. Who was he? An owl, as Camille herself sat in her cozy leather chair with her laptop on her hips. Pondering on the scale of my own popularity on the scale of the world by my one insignificant grain of sand. But on the scale of one's own account, we can be very matter-of-fact and businesslike. Let's make an account for Jenna. I'll edit with him. Then we'll go to advertising, split the profits. When you say that, you're not happy with the work. You want to talk about it. Wendy? Why do you understand people? And the trainings on how to understand yourself are given by me. Camille moved in the spacious and soft chair, smiled, and began in the playfully humorous tone they usually use to speak in. You see, Wendy, life is a school where everyone should learn their own lessons. The famous proverb says, we learn by teaching. That's right, Captain's School. Wendy clinked her glass with the camera screen and took a little swig. If you'll excuse me, I'll continue. Camille spoke in a serious tone, although I was now also hungry for something. Wait a second. The screen changed to show the side tab of the chair. Camille's stomping and Jenna's footsteps could be heard, apparently walking somewhere near the chair. Camille came running in with a bottle of Kefir and a large slice of sweet summer, from which she had somehow managed to take a big bite on her way to the chair. She continued to chew it deliciously. Roulette Poison munched on the Kefir, occasionally making Wendy a funny grimace with an ethereal mustache. Thus, Camille choked a little. Summer pounded her chest powerfully a couple times and continued talking. Thus, life experience itself allows for, as strange as it may sound, life experience. Assuming that this reality is conceived by someone immensely wise, or at least speculating that there is some global mechanism that somehow moves and controls this reality, we can assume that reality allows you to experience the version of events that you are missing. Going back to our proverb, by teaching we learn, we can assume that teaching or mentoring is the best way for one's learner to learn. Accordingly, the person who already knows about people does not need to learn. Okay, Camille, don't go out. There's a cute bartender on the next street over. He's working now. Come on, help us get acquainted and make romance between us like real love. You mean a movie or some real love you want to create? I mean a movie to make a real and secret love with this Borman. After all, what is our life, a movie? Or a book of life? Or generally a short story published on the side of the internet? But why so belittle our value? It's a little too sullenly Camille to steer and drink from a bottle of Kefir. Situational drinks make you sad. You're better off with Kefir. It makes me feel like Sterlitz. But I'm not going out. Well, I will, but not with you. Now, Wendy was talking through her laughter. Where do you think you're going? Honey, I'm not going anywhere. I'm gonna go play with Jenna. Seriously, Wendy, I'm not in the mood. I want to go out on my own. I'll come by your place one of these days. Come on, smack the not-so-cute ram for me. You're welcome to go out on your own. I'll go to the movies then, shall I? Wendy smiled and waved to her friend. She made a sad face about the lack of a common walk and pressed the space bar. A desktop appeared in front of her with a screensaver of cartoon meditates and capillaries. The indicator light on the camera went out. Camille closed the laptop and moved in her chair, shifting her hips. Wendy was on the phone. Sebastian came in from the bedroom where he sat at the computer. She called, asking me to go for a walk, but I'm not going with her. Come with me and I won't go with you. I want to walk and be quiet. We can be quiet. No, don't be angry. Camille realized that her husband might see in her refusal a continuation of the morning and begin to worry, which was not at all desirable. But also to continue this conversation slowly slipping into absurdity. Neither wanted to, nor did she want to go with anyone but the trusty Basta. Gathering for a walk, Camille once again thought how she adored the Bas. It is unknown what exactly attracted in this appearance. Probably the melancholy expression on his face, which reminded her of an office clerk. Perhaps she liked the fact that they had such a long, low torso on short legs, which they amusingly shuffled. Probably liked the huge ears and aristocratic spats that expressed some kind of steady seriousness. She called Jenna out for a walk, pulled on her cozy fall voluminous down jacket, put on her snowboarding pants to stay warm for sure, and headed outside. Camille decided for herself that looking at passers-by and at home was much more useful than looking at the news with indifference, or out the window or at the wall, especially as she walked with such a focused gaze, sometimes only taking in some faces. Otherwise, she was more beholden to the bigger picture. As of late, she had started to like to take a lot of walks, going out with Jenna, and for an hour or two at a time, to pick out roughly where to go, and through the houses and people, picking up some curious details, contemplating her own thoughts. After such walks, it became much better. There was less apathy, and the world seemed less monotonous and confined only to work and her relationship with Sebastian and her friends. Most of all, she liked to invent neighborhoods made up of paneled houses around evening, when the bulk of the residents had just arrived at their dwellings or were already settling in for dinner. It was getting dark outside, and the houses were warm, with a pleasant light and the feeling that people had come in after work and were now sitting with their loved ones, eating warm food, drinking warm drinks, talking about something pleasant. Camille looked into these windows from the street and thought about hundreds of different lives and destinies, the peculiarities of these people, and how strange it is that they live so close to each other with their very different lives. But in the evenings, almost every apartment is filled with warm light, which can be felt in the cool autumn street. At the same time, the succession of windows always seemed sad. More precisely, there was a feeling that is commonly called light sadness. There was something pleasant and reassuring about these paneled houses and their windows, but there was also something dreary, sometimes unbearably dreary. Camille literally burst into tears as she immersed herself in these feelings. She thought that these high-rises were full of some unbearable lyricism, more poignant than the lines of the most sensitive poets. Maybe, she thought, it's some kind of sum total of all experiences. These houses have their own tragedies, their own sadness. Someone died in them, and others were sad about it. Someone broke up and quarreled, and then they were sad too. Some were probably mad or deeply mistaken, and the whole world was sad about it. But there were also joys and amazing insights. Many people always came to their homes every day to be near their loved ones again. There were many people who loved each other and, if possible, all other people. Maybe that's what makes up some of the sum total. And so there is a mixture of joy and sadness, and there's such a shared flavor of human life, such a light sadness. Can poets do anything useful at all? If it's enough to walk around and look at the windows lit from within, they can try to broadcast that feeling. To make us, for example, Camille pondered sadly as she continued to wander the window-lit streets. But it's only about imitating something. Sometimes it's about the goods that are going to be sold to us, and that's where I can understand the deal. For example, I've beaten the head of the department, but I'm a workaholic, and always in reserve about the work of deputies, because of course not everyone is as smart as me. And I also go to all sorts of boring seminars, and I don't have time to go and stare at faces in windows. And someone offers me such an emotional commodity. Not directly, of course, offers, but it is clear to me that I buy a subscription on a book or serial site and start reading or watching a melodrama, because I know that the end of a melodrama is always tragic, and I want to feel the sadness of empathizing with the characters as well. But in essence, what am I doing? I'm kind of giving into these emotions. Or with that one, she turned to herself. And indeed, she stood in the middle of the street, thought, looked at the week, and walked slowly again. After all, when I look out of the windows, I too eat something, or what? I eat something too. No, I guess not really. You can't eat a beautiful landscape. How do you feel about it? That's not my attitude. I walk and look, and even perhaps I try not to disturb this harmony, not to touch it even with a glance, and even less to dig into it. But art that is for sale is eaten in a sense. It is a product that can be bought and sold. Camille stopped looking at the graffiti on the wall of the house, and in this case, it is not a direct feeling that is sold, but an indirect one, which someone has experienced in something packaged and made available. But that is not what is important, but the fact that such feelings are saturating, but they are attractive. Perhaps, Camille continued to ponder, these feelings are really tasty and something nutritious may be blood. It is said, after all, that artists write with their own blood, and someone else's blood can write. If, for example, take a lot of someone else's blood and write a picture with it, or a book or a poem, I guess someone can do that. There's probably a logic to it, though. If they buy a surrogate, they should sell a surrogate, something fake. There is logic, of course, but nothing real. Camille thought and smiled at Jenna, who was picking through her short wieners next to her. On the other hand, there's some business in it too. If something can be traded, why not trade it? The curious Protestant morality, which is said to be the basis for capitalism, suggests that it's possible to make money from trading feelings. Okay, so anyway, I realize that I can only get real feelings through my own experience or experience. But can I so experience a work of art that the experience is identical to my own experience? I guess a lot of people treat it the same way they treat food. Camille mentioned that more than once she has noticed how her friends at work share tearful stories from popular TV series with each other and seem to be seriously worried. But in fact, they'd bring themselves to an exalted state of sadness, which is actually joyful. I guess it makes them happy that it's bad for someone else. Just like horror movies a lot of people like to watch, because there's an opportunity to get the fear while staying perfectly safe when you seem to be threatened by something, but also not threatened. Is all art, then, a sham, or is there something worthwhile? Why even look for real art? And think about it. If here, there is a succession of houses saturated with different stories and feelings literally imbued with the very real. Wait though, thought Camille. What if the people in these houses stop being real, as if they stop feeling or start feeling not as they want and as they understand, but as it is considered necessary? What then is the nourishment of such houses? What light would come from their windows? Sometimes it barred new neighborhoods of apartment complexes, of prettier looking and more varied houses. Here too, there was occasional warmth from the windows, but something was wrong. Although Camille realized that in principle the inhabitants of panel houses and new apartment complexes were not particularly different, and the composition was roughly similar, except for some minor changes. These new houses seemed different to her. Maybe they had not yet accumulated the sum of experiences like the old houses. Nadia didn't like the high basements, which were given over to commercial space, and there were mostly liquor stores, bars, and beauty parlors. It was as if a new world was being built on this foundation, and everything seemed to be done to deceive themselves and each other. Bars to drown out the sight of grim reality, salons to hide themselves behind outward attractiveness. She saw the contented and well-dressed people who went out in the evenings to walk in the courtyards of their apartment complexes. She saw how satisfied they were with this comfortable and pleasant Watson. But the contentment seemed artificial, like Sebastian's behavior sometimes. You know, in general, I think I could use some other kind of work, but in the sense of earning money. Wendy Ad hobbled from a tall living room glass, in which bubble and colorful liquid. For example, do you go to the store? Sebastian and I do more delivery. Every week, we sit down at the computer in our robes in the morning. It's actually more enjoyable than shopping and less impulse buying. Yeah, it's all incredibly interesting. Wendy made an establishing gesture with her hand and went on to say, "But wouldn't you specifically want to save money?" "I don't specifically want to save money." Camille shifted in her chair to hold the laptop more comfortably, and with his other hand to stroke Natalia, lying next to him on the sofa. "I have more time to spend worrying about all this, especially now that I'm earning a decent wage. Aren't you tired of it? When we took turns cooking lunches in the master's program and carrying them to the institute. I have a carefree financial fatness now, and I like not looking at prices. It feels good. Well, if you calculated how much you could save and have more money, and everything would be done for you, so we are already saving. Well, can you buy a new house? I'll let you in on a secret. We can't buy a new car. And we'll probably never be able to buy a mansion either. Unless, of course, Sebastian starts picking up government contracts." But Camille briefly wondered if she should tell Wendy the details, but realized that she already knew a lot. And best friend after all. He's too much of a coward for that. And you know what? Fine. I'd rather he show off for me. There's a spell in there that'll eat my donkey right off. But I'm glad to have something to put away for my old age. I give a little money to a couple of foundations on a regular basis, and I don't have to worry. Yes. Wendy really wanted to talk about what's on her mind. It's all incredibly interesting, of course. Although, by the way, don't you think that if you had supported Sebastian H., he would have been doing a normal job there? I don't think so. Okay, whatever, Wendy went on about her own. I realized that the principle, or rather the content of the trade, must be changed. What trade? Trading with yourself, baby, for your information. I sell my face professionally, figuratively speaking. But that's the point. By the way, maybe I should put it a little more crudely, but that's not how decent ladies talk. That's right, you shouldn't. Camille smiled. Anyway, said Wendy amusedly, you've heard of joint shopping, but you've heard of it. Well, you're a genius and a certified psychologist, of course. But can that detail be an impediment to genius? Camille, you're laughing, but I've thought of everything, and I've even come up with a brand. Aggregates. Co-branding is kind of Soviet strawberry. Come on. Wendy continued laughing. Did everyone laugh at Andy Warhol, or who was ridiculed? Somebody was definitely ridiculed. That's right. I'm just saying that anyone can hurt an artist, and he will. I'm going to work hard for you poor people, so you can buy a mansion with a barbecue area. Genius, altruist, whatever. And why should I be blessed with such a blessing as our communication? Smiled Camille, quickly presented the laptop to change the folded on the Turkish who did not have a leg. Anyway, look, I learned that this topic is very popular. Moreover, I did the math, and they're really profitable and convenient. Bought a large batch, well, let's say, millet, and distributed small. I see. Do you want to become a store? On the contrary, not a store. In a store, there are a lot of middlemen and capitalism. Mine is, well, more precisely, in these general purchases. The product of labor is immediately delivered to the consumer of this product. And there is a lot of logic in this and little markup. It is clear, of course, I take a part of it for myself. Well, of course, how could you not? Yes, Wendy smiled and threw a cocktail. Not without it. I saw that the main problem they have is that they have no one to gather people and tell them how great it is to buy and save money all at once. I know how to tell people things and motivate them. The nation thought I was doing a lot of good with my money. You probably bring in clients. Well, let's be serious. I mostly do it for myself with what I make. Helping psychologically is probably more effective. And it's not, shall we say, my calling. I do what I know how to do, but this skill doesn't really connect with the real essence of a psychologist's work. So I think, if it doesn't matter what I trade, maybe I should do something useful. What is everyday happiness? When there is good food in the house, or okay, here you start unhappiness, but everyday comfort, some kind of coziness. But a lot of things depend on food, right? Of course, food, water, and nice words. The three jewels. what there is in the world. And fools think gems are jewels. That's what I'm saying. And here I am, helping you buy food and water cheaply. And I say nice things, and I canvass everybody. And everyone's happy and satisfied, and with money. And I'm the director of the Oscar brand. You know, I'd like to thank my friend Camille, who always believed in me. Wendy took the long glass with both hands like a statue. Oscar, you know, an award for some great achievement, like solving the food problem in the country, just ours. Or are you gonna extend that to Africa too? Very funny. Thanks for keeping my dreams alive. No, I mean, I think maybe it's okay. You do realize it's a little funny. You've got a name, you've got experience, you've got a PhD that's still being cited in publications, and you want to sell millet now. That's not what the profession is about. It's about organization and communication. Director of clinics and companies is not a toilet. What does millet have to do with it? I generally say that more primitive occupation, nothing primitive, on the contrary, useful. Here you are also, by the way, certified personnel service, and the essential amount of work, to see if the hires start stealing from the warehouses. Okay, Wendy, you're getting personal. This isn't an argument or a sport, so you don't have to prove anything. If you think you should pursue it, you have my support. Speaking of stealing from warehouses, we've got a little thing going on here. Camille started talking about the job. They talked for about half an hour. She told me that Sebastian was going away for at least a few days on family business. His mother was ill, and he had long forgotten to visit her. Sebastian came to the metropolis from the province where his parents stayed. And after he got together with Camille, he hardly ever went to his place. Only his parents came to visit a few times on vacation. So he wanted to spend time with his mother. All the more reason to do so. There are few projects at work that can be handled online. His assistants could handle the rest. Money was okay, too, so Sebastian could take a vacation. Camille didn't connect his departure with the fact that they had some kind of misunderstanding. In fact, given her long apolitical state, she didn't feel any tension. Sebastian walked to the parking lot alone. Camille had left for work early, and he was packing his bags and sitting at his computer. He left the house close to noon and went in for coffee and croissants. Talked to a young barista about the supply of coffee from various countries, joked about Copy Dude, and modern mass culture told about the fact that the original Copy Dude was invented by American marketers who were asked to do something about unprofitable Indonesian plantations, where most of the beans were eaten by small animals in garbage. Joked about the fact that the marketers who came up with the legendary advertising move were able to buy themselves a Mustang. And not only for the rhyme, taking from the Mustang, and himself laughed about it at once. Before the made enjoyment of the characters of the advertisement to sing the first sip of cappuccino with syrup right behind the counter in front of the barista. Sebastian walked leisurely down the small street that led to the multi-story Angara parking lot that stood close to the even taller new houses and the luxury apartment complex to which the parking lot belonged. On the way, he saw one of the parking lot guys he had glimpsed, said hello. Remaining focused, the seriousness of a general pondering the recent reports from the fronts, a little really talked about common knowledge news. Nourishingly biting off a croissant between phrases and any from a glass, on and barista for laughs. Actually for the sake of the fans. And then Sebastian, really, as if by the way, stuffed a piece of paper into a jar on the counter, put in a large quantity of small contraptions and gloves with a bell that were from some kind of toy set. Did you get something? I stopped going to the gym. The boy asked Sebastian. They lived nearby and used to go to the nearest fitness center. Also saw him and Camille. Yeah, always seemed to be like that, Sebastian replied, glancing at his torso, which did tighten his shirt a bit when walking. Come on, don't stress yourself out, said the guy, indicating with a motion of his hand, his stomach. I understand it's a ball of nerves. Sebastian didn't understand the reference to popular Soviet movies and didn't really think about references and humor because he was serious and grown up. I got a lump of nerves here. Sebastian looked at the guy with complete seriousness, raised his hand, and pointed to his head. "Okay, I see." The guy walked beside him for a bit, nodded to Sebastian, and walked further faster towards the parking lot entrance, leaving the serious Sebastian behind. A leisurely stroll. Camille hadn't called Wendy for a couple days. She hadn't called either. And Camille thought she might have a lot of clients, boards, a cute bartender. Or was she actually immersed in building her own brand, co-branding, co-shopping? Either way, Camille was going to stop by her place the other day. She went to work and in the evenings walked with Jenna, looking into people's eyes and into the windows of houses, thinking about the warmth in the houses she lived in from the fall wind, and watched how under the world unclothed and warm passers-by. Camille herself preferred to dress according to the principle of cabbage, that is, to use many different layers of clothing in such weather, so that really do not freeze in themselves. Recently, she had become known as a tragic cabbage when she was dressed like that. Although after her walk she felt a little better and was more of a joyful cabbage than a tragic cabbage. Walking through the poor streets, she bravely met gusts of wind. The other people, on the other hand, often felt as if they had been blown through the wind. Camille thought that the wind as a thread could pierce many people and thus connect them into some gigantic caterpillar. That is, into gigantic beads, where each individual person is a separate bead, and at the same time into a huge caterpillar, where each separate part of Putin's caterpillar so went out, or rather, the caterpillar walked along different streets, applied to the threads of the wind. One weekend, Camille had a snack before the show with Kafir and went for a walk with Jenna. She was going to stop by her place and take her out to the bar, or wherever she wanted to go. Camille thought that while Sebastian was away, maybe even move in with a friend for a few days, with Jenna taking time off work too. They would talk a lot, have a Bergman or Herman retrospective. Maybe she'll even help in the aggregate. If Wendy herself hasn't already thought of some new occupation and will pick up her first clients from the workers she knows at her firm. Foggy morning. Some kind of kefir, faded, not even kefir. Camille was beginning to recall the unpalatable soup with holes that she sometimes had to eat on weekends as a child. This soup had rare cooked vegetables in it, large chunks of dill stalks and greasy patches of oil on the surface. For some reason it always seemed cold, not even cold, but frozen like this. The fall weather had cooled off after summer. There were still large balls floating in the soup, and they came. But they didn't bring joy either. It was quiet and overcast. City mornings reminded Camille of this dull soup. All life was like this, dreary and ordinary, with greasy stains on the surface of the leftover and spilling broth everywhere in chunks, completely amorphous and falling apart, almost collapsing vegetables. Camille became so dreary that she decided to go into the small church next to which she passed through the windows of the building. A warm and pleasant light from the stylized electric candlelight was visible. There must have been a morning service, and Camille threw Jenna's leash a few times over the bars of a swing that stood not far from the door of the nursery and went into the building. And the rest of the service she caught a glimpse of, she liked. And as she left the building, Camille noticed that she was walking somehow even more leisurely and peaceful. Or maybe she's become less caught up in the world running somewhere and sees everything going on for a longer period of time and looks at the world more judiciously. Either way, Camille took her time tying up Jenna and occasionally glanced at those leaving the church. Sometimes she smiled at someone almost spontaneously and noticed in herself the emerging feeling of being in community with something and experiencing some common and pleasant secret that she had with these people. These thoughts pleased Camille, and she walked leisurely in front of the middle-aged women. "Good service," said one of them. "Yes, good, and the priest is so good, so right and inspiring leading. You can feel the grace," confirmed the other one. "Yeah. Did you notice how good his laugh is? It's like nectar, and it's so honeyed." I recognized the first one. "Yeah, that's right. I just wanted to tell you when he was talking to the congregation after communion. What a delicious laugh. A second woman laughed after the words about laughter, as if she was prompted by the taste in her mouth. "What's a delicious one?" The first woman continued. "Yes, the particle is like jam. How delicious. A good service and a priest so good the women turned down another street, and Camille no longer heard their conversation. She continued walking at a leisurely pace. The city was quiet in the morning. It was kind of nice inside. And when Camille felt like sneezing, she lifted her hand and pressed the edge of the top of her index finger deep into the corner between her lip and the bridge of her nose. She didn't want to break the silence with a loud check, but she didn't like it about herself either. And this method always helped quell the check. All it didn't take was a finger press right under her nose, and the sneeze would disappear as if it hadn't existed at all until now. Camille approached the house and mostly looked under her feet, digesting more of the experience from church, looking at the week and the yellow leaves on the asphalt sidewalk. She lifted her gaze higher, looked up at the Wendy and kitchen windows, next to which was a bulge from the typically compact balcony in the Khrushchevs. At first, she was even a little startled to see a half-naked man standing on the balcony. He was in one of his sleep robes, carelessly tied at the waist, but with a semi-open torso that looked not quite athletic, but overall quite harmonious and tanned. In the cool autumn air, Camille thought that the handsome bartender was standing on the balcony and slowed down to get a closer look at him. She was curious to find out more about her friend's new suitor. After all, people don't always reveal themselves in person, especially at first acquaintance. And here was still quite deserted morning. Putting on a robe, the man clearly enjoyed the opportunity to be almost on the street, half naked, and enjoy the proud solitude. Probably contemplating the accomplished and yet to come amorphous conquests on sleepy fronts, the man was clearly well prepared for his equestrian outing. Hedonist, Camille thought. Good in principle. After all, if he knows a thing or two about pleasure, he'll be able to provide Wendy with comfort and all sorts of pleasantries. He held on to the railing, smoky. Probably with a coffee mug next to it on the fracture was a lush morphine. Or some similar loaf in the other hand was a cigar, with which the man sometimes puffed on cigars. Camille stammered a little, for such a detail somehow filled out the image, but it also looked rather incongruous. The man stood with one foot on a low step, looking off into the distance and taking a big drag on a cigar. His whole appearance showed a successful businessman who had stepped out onto the upper terrace of his mansion and was contemplating the Hollywood Hills. Nevertheless, the outside space with this was clearly controlled by shabby Khrushchev buildings, a profusely broken and uneven street, slanting trees, silly banners, and advertisements. The man took his hand off the cup and took a bite of morphine with relish, never ceasing to hold the pose of shameful from. He sang from the cup and took a drag on his cigar. And in these movements, even rather in the sensations they expressed, tried to broadcast to the outside. Camille recognized something familiar. At first something like something known. Then she quickly guessed what familiar feelings this picture reminded her of. And such a cartoonish demeanor. Something akin to a howling fit of goosebumps went through her body. And then she barely restrained herself from laughing. So ridiculous she thought the figure was. And now, when she also realized the details, the situation seemed to her a complete delusion and some kind of mockery of the seriousness and normality of human life, played out before her by clowns in an unknown circus. What kind of idiot? Camille thought loudly to herself. She wanted to give Sebastian a resounding round of applause, so that Sebastian would pay attention and shout something like adorable. Good girl. But she didn't want to spoil his moments of triumph and happiness. No matter how ridiculous and idiotic its Sebastian unhappiness did not seem to herself. A cigar on the balcony of a Khrushchevka. How ridiculous is that? But everyone wants happiness and strives for it. Camille thought, moving further down the street. She wasn't particularly worried about whether Sebastian would see her or not. The devil hasn't left me, Camille thought with a smile. Or is it time for new problems and worldly felons? Many people have such experiences, and everyone strives for happiness. Wendy listened to music from the cooler was in the croissants, sliced recently defrosted pastry. She hummed along to the vocals, singing along from her coffee mug and playfully swaying her hips to the beat, melodic in sound. Sebastian came into the narrow kitchen and sat in the chair where Camille usually sat. He motioned a saucer toward him and put down his cigar. Wendy had allowed him to smoke in the apartments so he could be comfortable. He watched her move in silence with a look of connoisseurship. It felt incredibly good and confident. "We'll tell you." Wendy abruptly but gracefully straightened up after putting the tray of reds in the oven and turned to Sebastian. "Will tell." Sebastian changed his tone questioningly, adding a bit of bewilderment. "You don't think we should? What's the point for you to fight? For us to fight? For everyone to fight? There could be a lot of trouble afterward. Property. Yeah, property. There's all sorts of problems. And I don't want it. You still want to be with me." Wendy put her feet on the inside of Daddy's thigh and leaned her body toward him, bringing her face close with a playful smile and a burning gaze. "With you." Yes, Sebastian tried to look serious and judicious, but his voice still trembled a little. It was obvious that he was getting excited and yet enjoying the attention from Wendy. "We don't need to tell you. We can do that, can't we?" "I guess we can. Not much difference to me. And anyway, if you look at it that way, it's good that my friend and I share the same hobbies and tastes. Right? Maybe someday you can talk to her and we can work things out. I'm not claiming anything. You know, I'm not one for the details of everyday life and family life. But if we're good with each other and bring each other joy, why not?" Sebastian kissed Wendy's exposed thigh and took a sip from his cup. She sat down on his leg, and they both stared out the warm window of the oven where the good stuff was written down. Wendy put one arm around him. They were quiet and realized they didn't feel like talking. The steady whirring of the stove was nodding and soothing. The overcast weather did little to us. They smiled occasionally, glancing at each other. The bread made them howl from their cups. Wendy, for a laugh, could smell his cigar and make a funny and important grimace. She even remembered some of the facial expressions Camille had entertained her with recently, with an ethereal mustache, and showed Sebastian. He smiled and put his arm around her waist, emphasizing her slightly so she could get comfortable on him. The measured time stretched on, and they seemed to be frozen in some kind of timelessness and serenity. That must be what happy moments looked like. Sebastian somehow no longer felt the tension that was often present in his mind about having to prove something, to show something, unbeknownst to him, to the audience. Now, even though he was aware that he was someone who was behaving immorally, he somehow felt himself acting. Rightly, he felt that it was the right thing to do. That it was good he had thought of it, and good that he and Wendy were spending their time this way. He felt that now the audience could praise him, and he himself could tell, when the opportunity arose and the right situation arose, about his adventures with other normal men, as if in between, as if to say that he had once bitten off a sweet bite of this life. Literally, a little bit literally, hints on gentlemanly will describe some of the most attractive details of sleepy appearance. And then they'll talk about something else, but his buddies will appreciate it, and maybe will throw in support, and even with a little envy, but also with the understanding that here he is, Sebastian, a normal guy, came from the province and achieved everything, made a career, is successful with girls, has a family, always cool and confident looks. For some reason, Sebastian thought that now more accurately in such a situation, if someone will reflect on his success, he can become an example for someone to be an example, and therefore it is necessary to prove and conform. One should behave perfectly, to be clear in everything from day-to-day affairs, bringing large-scale work projects. Sebastian drank moments of joy from a mug, kissed them on the surface of sunny cheeks, sighed with Serbian smoke, peered through the window of the oven. And Camille took to the street and rustled the yellow foliage. She thought about the fact that leaves of golden and yellow color are like coins that trees have accumulated. It is their treasure and valuables that they can show off and make so beautiful, colorful crowns, attract the eye, creates a wonderful pattern that delights. And the trees themselves also know that they have accumulated much treasure and are now beautiful. Suddenly, they realize that this time will end and winter is coming, which will mercilessly freeze them. The trees understand and are worried. They want to pay off the winter and scatter yellow coins, leaves. They try to bribe and give away their wealth to the world. They no longer think of their own beauty and attractiveness. The trees only think about what to give away so that they can continue to stand so that they don't freeze. These bribes, however, cannot bribe the annual move. Winter takes no bribes, and fall continues to overstay its welcome with winds, announcing cold blizzards. Leaves flew in front of found feet. Nola would sometimes rush to play with them and bite some, or only whisk her head into another lifted cloud of leaves, waving her ears and sputtering.